The fun life of a troll in the Marvel Universe. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 51, Green Fat Attack. Just when Sherlock was still shocked by Tony's level of profiteer, before Sherlock could open his mouth to express his shock and ask Tony to keep working hard, Tony's phone rang first. After watching Tony answer the phone, his expression gradually changed from arrogant to solemn. When Tony hung up the phone, his expression was so gloomy that water could drip out. Seeing Tony's expression change like a face-changing face, Sherlock looked at his uncle with some doubts. What happened? Hearing Sherlock's question, Tony did not shirk and asked directly, "Where is your TV? Something happened in New York." Hearing Tony's words, Sherlock and his group did not shirk. They immediately led Tony and Happy to the gun store and turned on the TV opposite the cash register. As soon as the posture was turned on, without even changing the channel, Sherlock saw the New York City war on TV. The military even drove tanks and other things onto the streets of New York. If the live camera on the helicopter hadn't shaken, Sherlock would have keenly captured a khaki figure. This scene even made Sherlock wonder if the lighthouse country was going to have a coup. Looking at the picture on TV, Tony's face became not very good, and then he told Sherlock the content of the phone call. In fact, the content of the call was very simple. That is, Black Egg hoped that Tony would support the military and deal with the khaki big guy together. This was nothing. Even if Black Egg didn't say anything, Tony, as Iron Man, also expressed his responsibility. However, Black Egg repeatedly expressed in the phone that he hoped Tony could contact the magician that night, and even brought up the reason that the size difference between Tony and the monster was too big. This made Tony's face unusually black. On the one hand, he didn't want Sherlock to get involved in such a dangerous thing, and on the other hand, he was angry that S.H.I.E.L.D. had not given up the investigation into Sherlock's identity. After Tony and Sherlock explained the situation, Sherlock said it didn't matter and even felt a little eager to try. After all, who wouldn't be curious about what the green fat man's purple shorts were made of? Sherlock was curious enough to bear the change of the green fat man from XL to XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXL. You know, this pair of purple shorts was even ridiculed by netizens as being comparable to the Supreme shorts of Infinite Gems. What's more, Sherlock, who is a fun person, said that he must not miss such excitement. Seeing that Sherlock himself didn't seem to have any objection, Tony no longer hesitated and immediately asked Happy to bring his Mark V as Tony's #1 lackey. Happy naturally trotted all the way to take out a briefcase-sized thing from the passenger seat of the G63 pickup truck and threw it to Tony. After Tony simply told Happy to drive the car back later, he performed what mechanical ascension was in Sky's envious eyes. Seeing the armor smoothly covering Tony's whole body, accompanied by a roar, Tony had already flown into the air and turned into a small point of light. The few people then dispersed and returned to the store to continue their work, but everyone placed a screen in front of them to start paying attention to the situation in New York City. As for Sherlock, with the help of his uncle's cover, Sherlock found a place where no one was and completed his transformation. Looking at Sherlock, who was dressed like a gentleman and wearing a cyberpunk-style helmet, Sherlock's uncles also gave him a thumbs up. Did they mean that their children were much more handsome than Tony's Iron Man? This made Sherlock extremely ashamed, and he said that he would never transform in a place with people next time. After sending away his uncles, Sherlock used the apparition to leave his gun store with a sound of space distortion. When Sherlock reappeared, he was not far from the center of the battlefield. There were car wreckage and screams everywhere. Sherlock did not immediately join the battlefield, but instead began to rescue the injured civilians. It must be said that magic was much more convenient than technology at this time. With the help of the flying spell and the transformation spell, Sherlock cleared the civilians from the entire battlefield in just a short time. He even had time to maintain the buildings that were seriously injured to ensure that they would not cause greater damage due to the damage. After getting all this done, Sherlock put his mind on the center of the battlefield. At this time, Tony had already fought with the monster abomination created by the military with a mechanical level of Mark V, which was higher than that of Mark IV. Looking at the abomination, that was covered in khaki and full of spikes, Sherlock didn't know why he always inexplicably thought of the giant monster that Harry Potter met in his first year. Just when Sherlock was lost in thought, a loud bang came from Sherlock's side, interrupting Sherlock's thoughts. When Sherlock turned his head and looked over, he found that Tony was trying to pull himself out of the wall. The abomination standing in the middle of the battlefield was more interested in watching Iron Man and Sherlock, who had just come down from the wall and did not launch an attack. Haha, the most famous richest man in the lighthouse country, Tony Stark, and a rat who dares not even show his face? Interesting. Now I really want to try what it feels like to tear the richest man apart with my bare hands. Hearing the words of the abomination, Tony's face in the armor changed again and again, and he looked at Sherlock standing not far away and said unhappily, "Don't be in a daze, you help me, quickly deal with this damn big guy." Hearing Tony's words, Sherlock just shrugged his shoulders indifferently and casually gave Tony a recovery to restore the damaged armor to its new state, and then looked at the abomination standing not far away, without any panic in his tone. "Tony, you can't do it. Can you be so embarrassed by such a thing?" Hearing Sherlock's ridicule, Tony was furious. He secretly made up his mind to continue to update his armor after returning, but he was still solemn on the surface. "Stop talking nonsense, little brat. Pay attention. I'm going to attack." After saying that, regardless of how Sherlock reacted, the thrusters under his feet began to work and rushed towards the abomination standing in the middle of the road. Sherlock originally wanted to ask if this thing could withstand my big bite, but seeing Tony charging at the abomination, he thought about it and swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. Since someone has volunteered to become the Mount, Sherlock doesn't mind playing the role of a good wizard and having a good time with this Mr. Abomination. Chapter 52. The feud is so big. Sherlock was just going to play with this green fat enemy, so he reluctantly agreed to Tony's request and even took the initiative to cooperate with Tony, wanting to try to develop some combos. But it doesn't matter if he doesn't cooperate, but once he cooperates, Sherlock feels as if he has shit, and even regrets joining in the fun. The reason is very simple, it's because of the Mark V armor on Tony. The Mark V was made for Tony by Sherlock using the destroyer armor, and a small part of alchemy was used, plus the destroyer armor itself has a certain magic resistance, or exclusivity. His own alchemy plus the magic resistance of the metal of the destroyer armor made it extremely difficult for Sherlock to anchor magic on the Mark V, but it was not impossible. You have to know that the Mark V is not made entirely of the destroyer armor, and there are countless alloy materials inside it, and these alloy materials can be said to have no resistance under Sherlock's magic. But Sherlock didn't dare to anchor his magic on these materials, because most of these materials were wires or some skeletons or some messy chips. As a waste of science, Sherlock was afraid that he would really damage the inside of the Mark armor and make his good Uncle Tony a fart. As for the matter of anchoring Tony inside the armor, it was even more ridiculous. Although Mark V was already a lightweight portable armor, the weight plus the inertia brought by Sherlock's magic, as long as Sherlock dared to use it, Tony would definitely be injured. So the current situation is that Sherlock couldn't cooperate with his good uncle. All Sherlock could do was to release some magic by constantly using apparition to move around. And there are not many types of magic that can be used, just a few. The first is a blasting spell, which is also the only offensive magic that Sherlock can use at present. The reason why he can use this is also very simple. After being strengthened by Sherlock, Tony's armor can be said to be no different from tickling when facing the explosion created by Sherlock. Although the damage to the hateful breakfast is also limited. Secondly, it is to restore it to its original state. Sherlock can put this thing anywhere. Putting it on Tony is equivalent to helping Tony repair the armor. If it accidentally falls on Abomination, it will be useless. After all, even if Sherlock wants to repair something, Abomination has nothing to repair for Sherlock, and it is not as good as Hulk. After all, Hulk still has a pair of purple big shorts, and Abomination is strictly speaking no different from running naked. In the end, Sherlock can only use the auxiliary obstacle spell to create some invisible obstacles to affect Abomination's movement so that Tony can better wrestle with this big guy. But with the passage of time, except for Tony, who is still conscientious and responsible and is beaten most of the time, both Sherlock and Abomination feel a little bored. Abomination has always regarded Hulk as his opponent, but now he is entangled by such a small insect tin can, which cannot be beaten to death. Every time he beats the tin can, another small insect will repair the tin can. As time went by, Sherlock began to get more and more annoyed. He didn't dare to use powerful magic because Tony was always fighting with Abomination for fear of affecting his good uncle. The weak magic didn't cause any harm to Abomination, and under Sherlock's magic milk, Tony, who originally had no means to deal with Abomination, turned the battle into a war of attrition. Sherlock wanted to join in the fun and see the legendary green fat man in the purple big pants that were said to be indestructible. But now, not to mention that he didn't see the green fat man, even the battle, that should have been extremely refreshing, has become like an old lady's foot wrap, smelly and long. Sherlock even had an illusion that, as long as he could keep adding buffs to Tony, maybe Tony could fight with Abomination until the world is destroyed. Such a boring battle is not what Sherlock, a fun-loving person, wants. After thinking about it again and again, Sherlock couldn't help it. With the idea of letting Tony get a little hurt, Sherlock directly fixed the anchor point of the flying spell on Tony. As Sherlock's wand swung back fiercely, Tony in the armor felt that his body was pulled hard by a rope in an instant and flew backwards in an instant. Under the effect of inertia, Tony even felt that his internal organs were displaced. The moment he landed, Tony opened his visor, knelt on the ground with a pale face and kept retching. On Sherlock's side, there was no surprise at all, and he didn't even turn his head back. His whole attention was on the hatred. The moment Tony landed, Sherlock's wand danced again, and the full power version of the crushing spell was fired from Sherlock's wand like a cannonball. Of course, Abomination noticed Sherlock's action at the first time. Although he didn't know what Sherlock's attack was, he still raised his arms to defend himself. What the other two didn't expect was that just when Sherlock's spell was about to touch Abomination, a green figure fell from the sky at a very fast speed and hit Abomination directly. Abomination, who didn't react in time, was on guard against the green figure and smashed into the ground, and Sherlock's spell hit the green figure that fell from the sky. Then, under Sherlock's increasingly horrified gaze, the purple pants, that were originally known as the best quality in the world, began to break into pieces under the effect of Sherlock's spell. A huge green butt appeared in Sherlock's sight. As the owner of the butt, Hulk naturally discovered his own changes at the first time. In an instant, Hulk's whole face became distorted, as if he was extremely angry. He turned back fiercely and looked at Sherlock, who was standing there with a confused face. When Sherlock saw Hulk looking back at him fiercely, he had only one thought in his mind: it's over. This feud has become even bigger. Chapter 53 The thief came to ask for punishment? Question mark. Looking at the expression of the green fat man who wanted to eat him, not to mention Tony who had not recovered yet, even Sherlock who had mastered magic felt terrified. Even Sherlock had already felt it. The feud between him and the green fat man was completely established, and Sherlock had no doubt that he would enjoy a higher treatment than Thor. But Thor was an Asgardian, and he was different from the Earthlings. Thor was only stunned for a moment after being punched by Hulk, but if Sherlock was hit, he would probably be stunned for the rest of his life. Although Sherlock had already thought highly of the feud between himself and the green fat man, in fact, Sherlock obviously thought too little. After confirming who had destroyed his clothes, Hulk even threw away the abomination that had been planted in the ground, found a tree on the side of the road, simply modified it into a grass skirt, and then strode towards Sherlock. As he walked, he squeezed his huge fist and it creaked. Sherlock's trigeminal nerve twitched after seeing this scene. He waved his hands and began to retreat, shouting that this was a misunderstanding. But it seemed that Hulk didn't want to listen to Sherlock's explanation at all, and he still walked towards Sherlock on his own. Sherlock smiled bitterly in his heart. Damn it, he just wanted to be more serious, but he accidentally injured the green fat man who fell from the sky. This was a pure disaster. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have been so cheap to compete with the green fat man. Wouldn't it be nice to be Tony's nanny peacefully? Sherlock smiled bitterly in his heart and could only retreat while trying his best to explain to the green fat man. But it seemed that the green fat man had no intention of listening to Sherlock's explanation, and he still walked towards Sherlock step by step. At this moment, a spark suddenly appeared behind Sherlock, and the spark formed a portal in an instant. Sherlock, who was staring at the green fat man and retreating continuously, had no idea what was happening behind him. He stepped into the portal with one foot. When the green fat man reacted and wanted to rush up to pull Sherlock out of the portal closed in an instant. Sherlock disappeared in the battlefield. The green fat man who lost his target became more and more angry and could only vent all his anger on the poor abomination. On the other side, Sherlock, who stepped into the portal, found that he was already in Camotage when the portal closed. Sherlock, who was a little confused, just breathed a sigh of relief and turned around to see the smiling Ancient One standing behind him. Ancient One seemed to know something about what had just happened recently and looked at Sherlock's whole body. Sherlock was frightened by Ancient One, but he still said hello to Ancient One. After all, compared with the angry green fat man, Ancient One could still communicate, right? Master Ancient One. Sherlock bowed slightly to Ancient One, even if it was a greeting. Although he didn't know what Ancient One wanted to find him for at this time, there was no doubt that Ancient One solved a big problem for him. If it weren't for Ancient One, I would have probably beaten the green fat man to death by now. Good taste. Facing Sherlock's greeting, Ancient One said something to Sherlock with a smile in his eyes. In an instant, Sherlock's expression under the mask became dull. At this moment, Sherlock could not tell whether Ancient One saw the source of his equipment or was teasing him for accidentally damaging the green fat man's pants. Sherlock, with sweat all over his forehead, finally decided to talk about something serious and skip this topic. After thinking again and again, Sherlock bowed slightly and looked at Ancient One and said, "Master Ancient One, I wonder what you want to talk to me about." Looking at Sherlock, who seemed very nervous, Ancient One smiled to himself, turned back to the tea table to pour himself a cup of tea, and then said slowly, "It's nothing serious. I just want you to go to Asgard with me to ask for punishment." It would have been better if Ancient One didn't say it. As soon as Sherlock said it, the cold sweat on his forehead never stopped. Huh? What? Asking me and Ancient One to ask for punishment? Are you sure you're not asking for your own punishment? You have to know that at this moment, Odin's destroyer armor has been turned into a suit by Sherlock and is wearing it on him. Wearing someone else's things to ask for punishment? Isn't this like an old man eating arsenic and thinking he has lived too long? Sherlock knew that Ancient One was a very arrogant person. He could almost be said to be a player who walked sideways in the entire universe, but he never expected that Ancient One would be so arrogant as to run to someone else's territory and ask for punishment. Sherlock didn't seem to react at all. He directly made an expression of an old man on the subway to Ancient One, although Ancient One couldn't see it through the mask. Facing Sherlock's question, Ancient One still acted very calm. After drinking a sip of tea, he said this. "Is there anything you don't understand? Earth is still Earth." Facing the protection of Camotage, Odin threw Thor on Earth without saying hello, and his child Loki even sent the destroyer armor to wreak havoc. What's wrong with me going to ask for punishment? It seemed that Sherlock had seen such a strong Ancient One for the first time. Although there was nothing wrong with what Ancient One said, Sherlock still silently gave Ancient One a thumbs up in his heart. A big boss is a big boss. But Sherlock was still nervous about wanting Sherlock to go with him. After all, he took someone else's things without saying a word, and even refined them into his own equipment. Sherlock felt that it was a bit too much to wear someone else's things and run to their territory to ask for punishment. "Well, Master Ancient One, I won't go. You see, isn't it a bit inappropriate for me to go?" Sherlock held back for a long time before he finally said this. Looking at Sherlock, who seemed to be a little hesitant, Ancient One just smiled, and then after taking a sip of tea, he said as if talking to himself, "You're not going? What a pity. The magic books in a library in Asgard seem to be out of your reach. If I remember correctly, Asgard has its own unique magic." Sherlock interrupted Ancient One before he finished speaking. Facing the temptation of magic, Sherlock simply couldn't resist. Go. I'll go. Master Ancient One, I will definitely go. After hearing Sherlock agree to his request, Ancient One put a smile on his face again, looked at Sherlock and continued. Then go back and pack your luggage, and remember to change this outfit and hide it. You will go there as a student of Kamataj, my disciple, and don't forget to say hello to your family. Chapter 54 Preparations before departure. After hearing what Ancient One said, Sherlock broke out in a cold sweat again. He could not hide the source of his voice from Ancient One. Sherlock could only smile awkwardly and agreed. Seeing that Sherlock agreed, Ancient One nodded with satisfaction and continued. Okay, I'll wait for you here. When you go back and pack up, come over and we'll set off for Asgard. After saying that, Ancient One waved his hand at Sherlock. With Ancient One's action, a portal with sparks flashing suddenly appeared beside Sherlock, and on the other side of the portal was Sherlock's bedroom. Seeing that Ancient One had opened a portal for him, Sherlock no longer hesitated and crossed the portal directly to return to his gun shop. Gently pressing the energy source on his tie rope, Sherlock's suit made of the destroyer armor began to flow rapidly into the collar button of the tie rope like liquid. In just a few breaths, Sherlock returned to his appearance before he left. He looked ordinary, except that he was a little handsome in his casual clothes. Without any hesitation, Sherlock took off his tie and threw it into his library. Then he grabbed a few sets of clothes and threw them into the suitcase he had prepared long ago. The suitcase was made by Sherlock himself, similar to Newt's, but the space was not that big. It was about the size of a motorhome. This suitcase was Sherlock's second time making it himself. The first time was when Sherlock was traveling. After the suitcase was smashed by the Meow Hammer, Sherlock made a new one after returning home. This time when he went to Asgard, Sherlock would definitely be able to see Thor. Thinking about that silly guy and the environment of Asgard, where everyone was drunk, Sherlock ran quickly to Gates' office in Zyadaking and stole 2 bottles of good wine and threw them into his suitcase. After finishing all this, Sherlock reluctantly breathed a sigh of relief, and then, as if he had thought of something, he ran to the infirmary in the training center behind the gun shop with a smirk on his face and stuffed a few bottles of alcohol into his box. But what Sherlock didn't expect was that when he came out of the infirmary, he saw a figure. It was Lorna, who was adopted by Price. Lorna almost immediately discovered Sherlock and the box in Sherlock's hand. The little girl was extremely smart and immediately thought that Sherlock wanted to leave. She immediately hugged Sherlock's thigh and insisted on going out to play with Sherlock. If it were normal, Sherlock would agree to take the little lolly out to play, see the scenery, and eat some delicious food. But this time, Sherlock was going to an alien planet. Asgard should be said to be a pure alien planet, not to mention that this time he was going to ask for punishment with Ancient One. It would not look good if I went there with my family. If I really took Lorna away for 10 days or half a month, I wonder if Price would kill me when I came back. It would be embarrassing enough to go to Asgard. Was I here with Ancient One to do business, or was I here with my family to travel? The crying of the little Lada quickly attracted Sherlock's uncles and Sky, who was sitting at the front desk. They thought someone had bullied little Lorna, and after rushing over angrily, they found Sherlock sneaking with a suitcase. They were shocked that Sherlock appeared here. After all, on TV, the 3 of them, Green Fat, Abomination and Tony, were fighting each other until their brains were about to burst. In addition, the military was still making trouble outside from time to time, and the entire downtown of New York had become extremely chaotic. According to their assumptions, Sherlock should be in Tony's mansion with Pepper, or he should be supporting Tony outside the battlefield. He should not be here. After learning the whole story from Sherlock, they finally understood why Sherlock was here, and even though little Lorna was crying so much, Sherlock did not agree to take little Lorna out to play. Although they did not know what the so-called Kamataj and Asgard were, it did not prevent them from understanding that Sherlock was going to do business. In the end, Price came out to comfort her for a long time, and Sherlock repeatedly promised that he would bring gifts back. This made little Lorna stop crying. After greeting everyone, Sherlock ran to the store and put a lot of weapons and ammunition into the box, and then returned to his room with satisfaction. The reason for putting weapons and ammunition into the box is also very simple. Since Sherlock has decided to go to Asgard, he naturally has to use magic, but Sherlock's magic from the world of Harry Potter is too powerful, and Sherlock does not intend to use it in front of Odin and others. After all, Odin is not the Ancient One. The Ancient One can conceal Sherlock's specialness for the safety of the Earth, but as the king of Asgard, Odin must first consider Asgard, not Sherlock. Sherlock has made plans. After arriving in Asgard, he will use the magic of Camotage. Although his magic of Camotage is a little different from the real magic of Camotage, he can also use individual differences to fool people. He brought firearms to strengthen his attack power. After all, for Asgardians, the attack power of firearms is also very high. If you get shot, it will be very uncomfortable, even if you don't die. As for the main purpose of going to Asgard, Sherlock has already thought about it, which is Loki's illusion. Sherlock will always remember the feat of the old Loki who created the entire Asgard out of thin air in the TV series. What's more, whether it is the magic of Camotage or the magic in Harry Potter, there is no illusion in either. Sherlock has been envious of Loki's illusion, that can even simulate himself for a long time. After packing up everything, Sherlock opened the portal to Camotage and walked over very confidently, although Sherlock always felt that he seemed to have forgotten something. But under the temptation of the new magic, Sherlock quickly ignored the awkward feeling and was full of anticipation for going to Asgard, just like the expectation of the spring outing organized by the school in elementary school. When Guyi saw Sherlock coming back, he no longer hesitated. After drinking the tea in the teacup, he opened the portal to Asgard. Seeing the magnificent scene of Asgard gradually appearing in front of him with the opening of the portal, Sherlock put everything behind his mind at this time, and the only thing left was the admiration for the culture of Asgard. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 55 Asgard. As the Ancient One opened the portal, the entire Asgard gradually appeared in front of Sherlock on the other side of the portal. Although he had seen it countless times in the movie, and even saw the destruction of this glorious city, Sherlock still felt inexplicably shocked when he saw this city that seemed to be made of gold. The entire Asgard was like a spaceship made up of a huge city, floating quietly in the vast universe, and houses, contracts, lakes and farmlands all coexisted in this huge city. There was no cover-like thing over the entire city, but the magical thing was that there was no imbalance in air pressure when the portal was opened, as if the entire universe was full of air. For politeness reasons, the Ancient One's portal was not opened directly inside the city of Asgard, but on the broken rainbow bridge, which also allowed Sherlock to see the entire Asgard directly. Under the light from nowhere, the entire Asgard was like a fine work of art made of gold, especially the castle standing in the center of the entire city, which was even more golden. Just this intoxicating color is enough for Sherlock to like this city of appearance that he has really met for the first time. Even though he is a novice, Sherlock still says that this is his dream city. Ancient One ignored Sherlock's thoughts. After the portal was opened, he took the lead and stepped into the portal. Seeing Ancient One taking action, Sherlock felt something was wrong when he wanted to follow. Looking at the bright yellow monk's robe on Ancient One, and then looking at his extremely comfortable casual clothes, Sherlock patted his head in annoyance. With a casual touch on his body, the casual clothes on his body quickly turned into the same monk's robe as Camotage. Sherlock nodded with satisfaction, and followed Ancient One into the portal. When Sherlock really stepped on the land belonging to Asgard, Sherlock could no longer suppress his curiosity, and began to look left and right. Especially the rainbow bridge that was broken by Thor's sledgehammer under his feet. Although it has lost its color and has become less bright, Sherlock is still very curious about this rainbow bridge. After all, this thing can destroy a country in the plot of Thor 1. If you convert it, it is basically no different from the Death Star in Star Wars. It can even be said that the entire Asgard is a replica of the Death Star. The rainbow bridge is basically the main gun of this huge city starship. Thinking of this, Sherlock's expression became extremely strange. Once this setting is substituted, Sherlock can no longer look directly at the only official channel for entering and leaving Asgard. I don't know why Sherlock always feels that this thing is no different from the canon that he saw when he was a child in the circus. Sherlock, with an increasingly strange expression, couldn't help squatting down and touching the main gun of Asgard. The strange feeling in his hand made Sherlock begin to have a little interest in the Rainbow Bridge. The entire Rainbow Bridge feels like stone, metal, and a little bit of glass. Sherlock really can't figure out how this thing can transmit such a huge amount of energy to destroy a planet. Ancient One looked at Sherlock, who was like a curious baby, but he was not in a hurry. After satisfying most of Sherlock's curiosity, he reminded Sherlock to follow him closely, as the people of Asgard were already waiting. After hearing Ancient One's instructions, Sherlock restrained his curiosity and followed Ancient One closely and began to walk towards Asgard at the end of the Rainbow Bridge. As the two of them moved forward, the outline of the entire city of Asgard became clearer in front of Sherlock. Sherlock also saw Heimdall, the gatekeeper of Asgard, standing at the end of the Rainbow Bridge. Heimdall was still wearing the golden armor with a pair of horns. Sherlock was very impressed by this gatekeeper of Asgard, especially the uncle's unusual eyes. Before the time travel, Sherlock saw people randomly guessing where various gems were on the internet before the release of Avengers Endgame. Some people guessed that Heimdall's eyes were the legendary soul gems. It was because of the soul gems that Heimdall could see the distant Earth in Asgard. Now that he has seen the real person, Sherlock has become more and more excited. Fortunately, the Ancient One is still with Sherlock. Sherlock still has the most basic rationality and did not rush up to ask for an autograph or something. Seeing that the Ancient One was getting closer and closer with Sherlock, Heimdall, who was standing at the end of the Rainbow Bridge, hurried forward a few steps to greet the two. "Respected Supreme Sorcerer, please follow me. The carriage is ready. The God King is waiting for your arrival in the palace." After hearing Heimdall's words, the Ancient One nodded and followed Heimdall behind him and began to walk towards the carriage. As a little transparent, Sherlock naturally followed the pace of the big guy. Led by Heimdall, the two boarded a magnificent carriage. After they sat down, the carriage started automatically and began to walk towards the city of Asgard. As the carriage went deeper into the city of Asgard, Sherlock felt that his eyes were almost not enough. The interior of the entire city of Asgard gave Sherlock the feeling of a sci-fi version of medieval Europe. Coupled with the shops selling some magical items, Sherlock inexplicably felt that there seemed to be a bit of a gilded Hogsmeade here. The carriage took a long time to approach the magnificent castle in the center of the city. Sherlock didn't think it was anything from a distance, but now that he came to the basement of the castle, Sherlock only felt that the castle was so tall and majestic. At this time, there was already a person who looked like a minister waiting for the two outside the contractor. After the carriage stopped, the minister-like person led Sherlock and Guyli to walk into the castle. Sherlock looked around like a curious baby all the way, observing everything around him. It's no wonder that Sherlock looked like he had never seen the world. After all, including the two lives before the crossing, this was Sherlock's first contact with alien civilization. Under the guidance of Chengda, Sherlock followed the Ancient One to the hall of the God King Odin. At this time, the hall was already full of important figures from the entire Asgard. God King Odin sat on the throne on the high platform, holding his own spear in his hand, and Frigga, the Queen of Gods, stood beside God King Odin. Under the high platform, facing the gate, stood a figure similar to the ministers of Asgard, and Thor, as the son of Odin, was naturally among them. Chapter 56, The Tacit Understanding Between Men. Sherlock spotted Thor standing among the ministers almost immediately. The reason was very simple. Thor standing among the ministers was like a husky standing among wolves. Not to mention that Thor was the only one with a very rich expression and a shocked expression among the serious people. Sherlock even suspected that if this was a two-dimensional cartoon scene from Disney, Thor's chin would have been dragged on the ground at this time. Of course, as a friend who was more familiar with Thor, Sherlock still understood Thor's meaning from his shocked expression. "Why are you here?" In the face of Thor's question, Sherlock just rolled his eyes in annoyance and looked at the Ancient One beside him. The meaning was also very clear. "Guess why I'm here?" Thor and Sherlock had been together for so long that he naturally understood Sherlock's thoughts very well. Thor almost understood Sherlock's gesture in seconds, and the next second Thor had the expression of an old man on the subway. "You are actually a mage. You haven't told me yet. I'm your friend." Seeing Thor's expression change from an old man on the subway to a pitiful man, Sherlock almost had goosebumps all over his body and even ignored the communication between Ancient One and Odin and started to send a telegram to Thor wholeheartedly. "You didn't ask, what can I do? And you know that the mages in the atrium almost never come out." Seeing Sherlock winking at him to convey the message, Thor was stunned for a moment, but the next second his expression became more aggrieved, staring at Sherlock standing next to Ancient One. "Fuck, you are not nice enough. When Loki beat me, you, a mage, didn't even come out to help." Sherlock, who understood Thor's meaning, rolled his eyes and almost rolled up his head. The meaning was also very obvious. "First of all, I was not at the scene, and secondly, it was your family matter. Why should I, an outsider, intervene? And finally, I haven't asked you to compensate for my beloved car yet." Thor, who understood Sherlock's meaning, was obviously stunned for a moment, and then he looked a little embarrassed, as if he was sorry for damaging Sherlock's car again. Seeing Thor's silly expression, Sherlock felt that this guy was absolutely hopeless. He covered his face unhappily to say that it was okay and someone would compensate him. After understanding Sherlock's meaning, Thor became visibly happy. Among a group of ministers with serious expressions, Thor's performance became more and more like a one finger two-ha. He happily looked at Sherlock standing next to Ancient One and continued to wink and continue to convey information to Sherlock. "Well, since you are here, I will treat you to a drink after finishing the business. You must try the wine of Asgard, which will definitely make you linger." Facing Thor's invitation, Sherlock gave Thor an unhappy expression, and the meaning was also very clear. "Let's talk about it later. There is still business to do." After expressing his meaning, Sherlock planned to listen to what Guyi and Odin were talking about, but it was obvious that Thor did not intend to give up the opportunity he had finally obtained and planned to continue to communicate with Sherlock. Standing behind Guyi and facing the people of Asgard, Sherlock naturally could not ignore Thor, who kept winking at him. In desperation, Sherlock could only give Thor a questioning expression. Seeing that Sherlock was finally online again, Thor became visibly excited and began to continue to wink and wink to Sherlock to continue to convey information. "How is Jane? Tell me quickly, how is Jean now? I really miss her." Sherlock, who had just come online, was fed a big mouthful of dog food by Thor without any explanation. He rolled his eyes in annoyance and secretly cursed a damn love dog in his heart. Then he began to wink and wink to Thor to convey signals. "Don't worry, it's fine. I'm now studying how to find a way to see you again." Seeing the message from Sherlock, Thor's face turned red and he seemed a little shy, which made Sherlock feel cold again. Can you imagine the shy look of Zhu Jinjiang, who is over 1.8 meters tall and has an arm of 200 kilograms and can run a horse? Thor's shyness came and went quickly. Soon, Thor seemed to remember something and looked at Sherlock expectantly as he continued to wear the message. "By the way, how did you get here? I remember that the rainbow bridge has been broken." In response to Thor's question, Sherlock secretly drew a circle with his hand in a bad mood, and the meaning was very clear. Kamatage's exclusive spell, Portal. Seeing Sherlock's appearance, Thor's eyes lit up, staring at Sherlock's slightly shaking hand, and the whole person was full of hope. "Portal? Can we go back to the atrium? I want to see Jane. You know, after the rainbow bridge broke, I can't go to the atrium to see Jane. My father and mother are also against me leaving Asgard at this time." Looking at Thor, who was shining with hope like a dog, Sherlock suddenly felt bad. Maybe it was out of anger as a single dog. Sherlock pretended to think for a while and then shook his head slightly at Thor. "It's unlikely. The Ancient One can make such a long distance portal. I'm not good enough and can't open such a portal at all." Sherlock, who looked regretful on the surface, was very happy at this time. The anti-love alliance between him and Daisy Lewis finally made a historic step. Seeing that Sherlock seemed to reject him, Thor became visibly disappointed and didn't notice the cunning look under Sherlock's eyes. Thor, who was disappointed for a while, didn't seem to give up. It took only a short while for him to regroup and look at Sherlock eagerly. Sherlock naturally noticed Thor's change and was waiting for Thor to continue to convey the message. But for some reason, the excited Thor became serious almost in an instant, and his face quickly became expressionless, looking extremely serious, as if the person who had just winked at Sherlock was not him. Sherlock was full of doubts about Thor's change, and had no idea what had happened. He just subconsciously felt that something was wrong. The next second, Sherlock's bad feeling became a reality, and the voice of the Ancient One rang in Sherlock's ears. "How is it? Have you finished chatting with Thor, the son of God King Odin?" In an instant, Sherlock's whole body was covered with goosebumps, as if he was caught by the teacher passing notes in elementary school. He turned around and looked around with an embarrassed face. It doesn't matter if he doesn't look at it. Once he looks at it, Sherlock feels that he is almost no different from being socially dead. In the whole hall, not only the Ancient One, but also the God King Odin, the Queen Frigga, and the ministers all set their eyes on him and Thor. Everyone's expression is like watching a good show. Chapter 57, The Magic of Asgard. Compared to Sherlock, who was so embarrassed that he almost kicked the ground with his feet, Thor's face was as thick as a city wall. He deeply implemented the characteristic that, as long as I'm not embarrassed, it is others who are embarrassed. He just stood there with a wooden face. No matter how Sherlock winked at Thor, Thor always looked like I didn't see it, and I don't understand it. Just like a classmate who shirked responsibility when being caught by the teacher. Sherlock was so anxious that he cursed Thor more than 100 times in his heart, and his mind was full of how to relieve the current embarrassment. Just when Sherlock was about to feel that he was going to die, Frigga, Thor's mother, sighed helplessly and stood up, came to Sherlock's side to help Sherlock out. "It can be seen, little guy, you have a good relationship with my stupid son. He caused you trouble when he was in the courtyard." The words of Queen Frigga were like a spring breeze, blowing into the heart of Sherlock, who was about to die of embarrassment. Looking at the gentle Queen Frigga with gratitude, Sherlock bowed slightly and answered, "You are too polite, Queen God. Thor is my good friend, and I should take care of him." Faced with Sherlock's politeness, Queen God Frigga smiled gently, and then continued, "Just call me Frigga, my son. I know this fool must have caused countless troubles. Okay, let's not talk about him. Come with me. King God Odin has already discussed with your teacher Ancient One." After saying that, Queen God Frigga turned around and wanted to take Sherlock away. Sherlock hurriedly looked at Ancient One standing beside him. Ancient One didn't care about Sherlock's distraction just now, and smiled and nodded to Sherlock. After seeing Ancient One nod, Sherlock was relieved, and boldly followed Queen God Frigga out of the hall. Along the way, Frigga led Sherlock to constantly introduce the layout of the entire palace to Sherlock, and the use of each room, just like visiting a classmate's mother when visiting a classmate's home. It was not until Frigga led Sherlock to a golden double door that Frigga stopped her introduction and slowly pushed open the door. Behind the door was a huge library. Although it was not as large as Sherlock's private library, it was also as large as a library in Hogwarts. After leading Sherlock in, Frigga looked at Sherlock, who was looking around curiously, and said, "This is a library of Asgard. All the magic of Asgard is in this library. You can look for the catalogue of magic books you need in the mirror in the middle called Bragi," Frigga said while pointing to the huge mirror-like object in the center of the library. "God King Odin and Master Ancient One have already discussed that you have a full 15 days to learn any magic in the library. I can decide to start counting from tomorrow, and today's time is a gift to you. It is used to thank you for taking care of Thor, who has lost his power and is willful, in the atrium. Please don't refuse. I know this time is short, but this is the greatest convenience I can give you within my authority. After all, you don't belong to Asgard." After listening to Frigga's words, Sherlock hurriedly bowed to express his gratitude. Then, "Respected Miss Frigga, thank you for your generosity." Looking at Sherlock's expectant but restrained look, Frigga just smiled and waved to Sherlock. "Okay, little guy, I won't bother you anymore. You must work hard to study." After that, Frigga walked out and closed the door of the library. The moment the door closed, Sherlock cheered and ran eagerly to the big mirror named Bragi to start looking up the magic book he needed. For a full 16 days, Sherlock had not left the library except for necessary physiological issues. Even when sleeping and eating, Sherlock tried to use the nutrients and stimulants in the potion as a substitute. Sherlock first spent 5 full days to roughly understand the basic knowledge of magic in Asgard, and then began to find his favorite magic with the help of Bragi. When learning about the basic magic of Asgard, Sherlock soon discovered something strange. According to the basic magic knowledge in the library, the entire Asgard is a product built on a magic technology civilization. It stands to reason that the people in Asgard should have been able to use this magic technology to create many things like magic cannons, magic star destroyers, and at least magic pistols. But it is amazing that, although the warriors in Asgard can forge artifacts with outstanding effects with the help of magic technology, their main fighting method still tends to be cold weapons. This puzzled Sherlock, and in the end he could only blame the Asgardians for being immortals. Asgardian scientists like Newton, Einstein, and Faraday had a much greater impact on the entire Asgard than these Earth scientists had on Earth civilization. After learning the basic knowledge, Sherlock naturally came into contact with Loki's illusion magic. Of course, in addition to throwing out illusion magic, Sherlock also found a magical magic called sequence magic in the magic system in Asgard. The name alone may not be familiar to everyone, but as long as you have watched Tanar's War, you will not be unfamiliar with this sequence magic, which is the magic that the group of magicians flying in the sky use rifles to shoot. On the Asgard side, these sequence magics are unique to archers, and they are not as varied as those in Tanar's War, with only a few basic compositions. There are only 3 types: penetrating, blasting, and offensive. Archers can increase their range, power, and defense by constantly optimizing the magic sequence. Sherlock was so jealous that he finally included this so-called sequence magic in his learning goals. In the end, he could only spend 6 days on illusion magic and 5 days on sequence magic. Because time was too tight, Sherlock had no time to experiment with the magic he had just learned. He could only try to remember all the magic in his mind and experiment slowly later. Just like that, on the 16th day, the door of the library slowly opened, and Sherlock, with 2 huge panda eyes, appeared in the eyes of Thor, who greeted him enthusiastically at the door like a homeless man from nowhere. "Fuck, what did you do in the library? I'm not as miserable as you when I was wandering on Earth." Thor couldn't help but exclaimed when he saw Sherlock's appearance. In response to Thor's question, Sherlock rolled his eyes in annoyance and answered weakly, "Stop talking nonsense, Thor. Help me wash up and get something to eat. I think I can eat a whole cow now. I want to have a good sleep after eating." Chapter 58: The Life of the Salty Fish Wizard in Asgard. 1. After hearing Sherlock's complaints and seeing Sherlock looking like he was going to die in the next second, Thor and the others did not hesitate anymore. They all helped Sherlock up and walked out. It would have been fine if they hadn't helped him. Sherlock could still try to stay awake, but with everyone's help, Sherlock felt that he couldn't stand it anymore. His eyelids seemed to be as heavy as Mount Tay. Sherlock had no choice but to shout out a sentence with all his strength and consciousness. "Let's go eat first." After shouting out this sentence, Sherlock felt that he could no longer control his eyelids. As soon as he closed his eyes, he seemed to be in a coma and fell into a deep sleep. What Sherlock didn't know was that although his consciousness had fallen into a deep sleep, and there was even a snot bubble on Sherlock's nose, after he fell asleep Sherlock's body was not asleep. It may be that the loss of nearly half a month made Sherlock's body hungry and thirsty, and coupled with the order given to the body before Sherlock lost consciousness, although Sherlock had fallen asleep, his body kept repeating a sentence. "Go eat first. Go eat first." This situation is quite explosive even on Earth, not to mention Asgard. Since the historical records, the place where such a situation occurs most is the popular cartoons on the island of Zaorizi, the largest island in China. Such a situation has never occurred in reality. At this time, everyone stopped and seemed to be entangled in whether to listen to Sherlock and go to eat first, or to send this guy who will die in the next second to the infirmary first. Everyone was entangled between the doctor and the chef. In the end, Thor made the decision. Who cares? Since his brother has spoken, he will listen to his brother and go to eat first. So, under Thor's silly decision, everyone hurriedly carried Sherlock to the cafeteria of the castle. After arriving at the cafeteria, Sherlock's performance can be said to be a knife pulling the buttocks opening his eyes. Of course, it was the people in Asgard who opened their eyes. The reason was very simple. After everyone put Sherlock on the chair in the cafeteria, Sherlock still kept shouting to eat first. Someone was trying to shout for food. As a chef in the palace, he naturally couldn't ignore it. The chef brought Sherlock a meal at an extremely fast speed. However, when everyone was still thinking about how to eat Sherlock, who didn't know whether he was asleep or unconscious, something happened that stunned everyone. Sherlock, who was already asleep, seemed to smell the food. Although his consciousness was still asleep, under the combined effect of magic and the body's desire to survive, Sherlock's body moved on its own. There was no table etiquette. Sherlock grabbed the food with both hands and stuffed it into his mouth frantically, as if he was starving. A portion of food was quickly stuffed into Sherlock's stomach in such a primitive way of eating, and then he began to repeat the first sentence, "Let's eat first." As the royal chef of Asgard's palace, the chef saw that Sherlock was obviously not full, so he rolled up his sleeves and started to work hard in the kitchen. Gradually, the chef found something wrong. Compared with Thor's group of strong men, Sherlock looked thin, but his stomach was like a bottomless pit. He stuffed everything he could eat into his mouth unconditionally. It had been a whole hour, and Sherlock was still repeating the sentence, "Let's eat first." Not only the chef, but even the onlookers noticed Sherlock's abnormality and began to make a fuss, especially Thornag, who was a fun person. Thor, who was not afraid of making trouble, even took the lead in discussing what to stuff Sherlock with to make him full, including but not limited to excrement, textiles, including but not limited to clothes, flags, etc., various leather products, including but not limited to belts, leather shoes, leather armor, etc., metal products, including but not limited to various weapons and even armor, etc., wooden products, and daily necessities, including but not limited to various soaps, toothpaste, etc. Some people even opened a gambling table and started inviting people to place bets. The chef was afraid of problems, so he could only call on his friends to help speed up the preparation of food and find someone to find a doctor. In case the group of idiots outside really fed the Asgardian guest some messy things, it would be convenient to rescue him with a doctor. But what the chef didn't expect was that after the doctor arrived, he joined the group of people who were having fun, led by Thor. The only difference from Thor was that the group of doctors was more curious about Sherlock's current condition, especially Sherlock's stomach, which seemed to be a bottomless pit. The doctors were so curious that they exploded. The whole castle became more and more lively under the noise of this group of people who were having fun, and many people even ran to the cafeteria to watch the fun after hearing the news. In the end, the fun came to an end because of the arrival of the Queen of Gods Frigga. After all, when Frigga arrived, Thor was quietly trying to stuff his meow hammer into Sherlock's mouth. Frigga stopped Thor's unreliable behavior and scolded her own son in a bad mood. Seeing that Sherlock had almost finished eating, she ordered Thor to carry Sherlock, who was full but still sleepy, to the infirmary for a checkup. Then he was sent to the bathroom to wash and find a clean guest room for Sherlock to rest. Under the high pressure of the Queen of Gods Frigga, this farce was over before it even started. Although Thor, who was caught, was not very willing, he still listened to his mother's words honestly, carried Sherlock, who had already started snoring, and urged the doctor to follow. Frigga followed the group of doctors throughout the whole process. She would not ignore the light in the eyes of the group of doctors. She even doubted for a time that, if she was not there, this group of doctors who were extremely interested in Sherlock would secretly dissect Sherlock to see how Sherlock ate so much, and then quietly heal Sherlock. Don't doubt it, Asgard does of such technology. Fortunately, Thor and Frigga followed the whole process, which saved Sherlock from the disaster. He was safely thrown into the bathtub by Thor, washed clean, and then thrown on the bed in a guest room. Chapter 59, The Life of the Salty Fish Wizard in Asgard, 2. Sherlock slept for 2 whole days and woke up slowly on the morning of the 3rd day. Nestled in the quilt, Sherlock stretched out very comfortably, blinked his mouth, and casually pulled out a bottle of water from his library, sat up and drank the whole bottle, and then drank a bottle of water with satisfaction. But the next second, the comfortable expression on Sherlock's face disappeared without a trace, and the whole thing was frozen in place, as if it had been acupunctured. The reason was very simple. Sherlock found that he was not in his bedroom. And the most important thing was that Sherlock's clothes disappeared without a trace. Damn it, at this moment Sherlock even imagined a lot of plots that only appeared in bloody TV dramas. After a while, his IQ slowly came online, and Sherlock remembered that he seemed to be still in Asgard. But after his IQ came online, Sherlock's face became even worse. Damn it, he was already in Asgard. Where did his clothes go? Sherlock looked hopeless and lay on the bed, wrapped in the quilt tightly, and began to think hard about what happened. But after a while, Sherlock could only recall that he couldn't control himself and fell asleep, and he didn't know anything. Seeing that his memory seemed to be fruitless, Sherlock felt as uncomfortable as if he had drunk a lot of wine. He took out some clothes from the suitcase he threw in the library. Just as he got up and was about to change, the door of Sherlock's room was pushed open. This guy scared Sherlock so much that he almost jumped back to the bed at the fastest speed in his life and wrapped himself tightly with his quilt. Fortunately, the one who pushed open the door was not the beautiful girl or the burly man that Sherlock had imagined, but a maid. After the maid saw Sherlock wrapped in the quilt and looking terrified on the bed, she was stunned for a while and then asked with a look of surprise, "Hello, distinguished guest, you finally woke up. His Highness Thor came more than once while you were sleeping." After hearing the words of the maid, Sherlock calmed down a little. The most important thing was that he didn't feel anything strange, which made Sherlock feel relieved. After thinking for a while, Sherlock asked the maid, "Excuse me, how long did I sleep, and what happened when I was asleep?" After hearing Sherlock's question, the maid was stunned for a moment, then smiled and told Sherlock about what happened. Of course, the maid didn't know about the bet made by Thor and his gang of bastards, and all the news was just what she heard. The more Sherlock listened, the weirder his face became, especially the fuss in the cafeteria. Sherlock felt like he was listening to a comic book. After all, how could he not know that he had eaten the rubber fruit? Otherwise, how could he explain that he actually had Luffy's skills? He could eat while sleeping. Could his last name be Monkey instead of Phoenix? It was outrageous. It was outrageous to open the door. After a while, Sherlock reluctantly accepted his extraordinary talent. Looking at the maid who was still standing there, Sherlock still thanked her politely and asked her to leave first because he needed to change clothes. She didn't notice the weirdness in the maid's eyes at all. After all, when Sherlock was carried out of the bath by Thor, he simply wrapped Sherlock with a bath towel, and Thornak didn't pay attention to the problem of whether he was exposed or not. He threw Sherlock on the bed carelessly. It was Frigga who asked the maids to put Sherlock into the quilt. Fortunately, the maid was kind. After just thinking for a while, she decided not to tell Sherlock about it. After all, sometimes knowing too much is not a good thing. After nodding slightly, the maid left the door of the room and closed the door of the room. After Sherlock took out a set of sportswear from his suitcase and put it on, he opened the door of the room and asked where Thor was. After getting the answer that Thor should be drinking with his friends in the cafeteria, Sherlock walked towards the cafeteria leisurely. However, as Sherlock walked on the road, he gradually found something wrong. Everyone looked at him strangely, and some people even pulled their companions aside and started whispering after seeing Sherlock. At this time, even if Sherlock was stupid, he knew that there must be something wrong. Either the maid didn't know, or the maid didn't tell him. Sherlock, full of anger, quickly came to the cafeteria of the palace, pushed open the door fiercely, and roared, "Thor, what did you do to me?" The cafeteria was drinking lively under the leadership of Thor. With Asgard warriors drunk per capita, the atmosphere in the cafeteria was no different from a party on Earth. Sherlock's roar also made the whole party quiet down all of a sudden. Thor, the main active person at the party, saw Sherlock's lively and energetic eyes and rushed over with a glass of wine. "What are you talking about, my friend? What will I do to you?" Instead of doubting what I will do to you, you might as well tell me what you did in the library to become like that. In the entire history of Asgard, you are the first person who feels like he is about to die after walking out of there. Listening to Thor's words and looking at the people around him who all looked like curious babies, Sherlock was stunned for a moment, and the original anger was extinguished without a trace by Thor's interruption. Scratching his head awkwardly, Sherlock recalled carefully before speaking. What can I do? I just memorize the basic magic patterns of Asgard and memorize the books on illusion magic and sequence magic. What else can I do? What did you do, Thor? Why did everyone look at me strangely on the way here? Sherlock didn't notice that after he finished talking about what he had done in the past 16 days, everyone in the venue looked at him as if he was a monster. Even Thor looked at him with a look of what the hell. He even completely ignored Sherlock's subsequent questions and grabbed Sherlock's shoulders and shook them hard. You mean you memorized the basic magic patterns of Asgard in these 15 days? And you also learned illusion magic and sequence magic? Sherlock was interrupted again and acted a little impatient. He looked at Thor, who was shocked, and said in confusion. To be exact, it took 5 days. 5 days on the basics, 6 days on illusions, and 5 days on the sequence. What's wrong? Is there any problem? As Sherlock's voice fell, the whole venue became so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. After a long time, the people in the venue no longer had the heart to continue the fun, and they put down their glasses and walked out. Even Thor looked at Sherlock with a serious face, which made Sherlock confused and didn't understand what happened. What's going on, Thor? Why did they leave after listening to me? Hearing Sherlock's question, Thor also had a complicated expression, patted Sherlock on the shoulder and said, well, how should I put it? The people you can see now learned those basics, including me, but the fastest person among us who learned these basics took nearly 3 years. I won't say more, I will go to the practice field with them. You are too discouraging. Chapter 60 The Life of the Salty Fish Wizard in Asgard. 3. Sherlock was unintentionally versatile, but he didn't feel the slightest bit guilty about it. Although he didn't know what these bastards had done to him, Sherlock regarded this versatile as revenge against them. Of course, Sherlock naturally followed Thor to the practice field. After all, Sherlock had only memorized the book, but magic still needed to be practiced to learn. Even so, Sherlock only took 3 days, and under the watchful eyes of Thor and others, he had already skillfully used the illusion magic and sequence magic from Asgard. Such a fast speed made the eyes of this group of melee fighters almost fall to the ground, and Sherlock had become quite familiar with this group of reckless men in these 3 days. Sherlock also figured out one thing, that is, this group of reckless men headed by Thor were all absolute scumbags in magic, even to the point where they couldn't be any worse. This also explains why it took this group of people 3 years to learn the basics. Of course, as Sherlock became more and more proficient in magic, he also learned something that made him feel like he was dying. That is, the sequence magic he learned was actually the most primitive version. Now no one in Asgard uses such a primitive version of sequence magic, and the sequence magic of those archers has been updated to thousands of types. This made Sherlock beat his chest and stamp his feet. This wave was a loss for not studying history and humanities. He had been studying for a long time and actually learned the weakest primitive version. Fortunately, Sherlock's mentality was relatively good, and he quickly adjusted his mentality. After all, the primitive version had infinite possibilities for Sherlock. This thing is like the Type 59. No matter how it is changed later, even if it is changed into a Star Destroyer, its essence or core is still the Type 59. Sherlock thought that he had obtained the prototype core. The Asgardians were able to develop sequence magic to thousands of positions. Sherlock believed that he could do it, and even do it better. After all, Sherlock came from a country that modified a World War II bomber to the point that 26 letters were not enough. Sherlock was not confident about this. Seeing that Sherlock had gradually mastered his magic, Thor, as a warrior, naturally stood up and proposed to practice with Sherlock under the instigation of everyone. After all, Sherlock's magic talent made them really jealous and envious, especially in the past 3 days. They watched Sherlock go from knowing nothing at the beginning to being so fluent in casting spells now. Sherlock naturally did not refuse Thor's challenge, and even looked at the group of people following Thor with such ill intentions. If Sherlock did not know any time-stopping magic, Sherlock's library might have collected a complete set of Meowhammer version of Asgard Warrior's full set of painful masks. As for Thor's challenge, Sherlock also made Thor realize two things clearly, that is, what it means to not mess with Sherlock, and what it means that adults have changed. As soon as the call to start was given, Sherlock used illusion magic to launch a wave of Naruto's clones. Under the blessing of illusion, the whole venue was covered with Sherlock, who surrounded Thor, a reckless man. Thor, who was extremely familiar with illusion magic trained by Loki, would naturally not be scared by such a scene, because he knew that, even if there seemed to be a lot of people, there was actually only one main body. In addition to the main body, the rest were just phantoms. But the next second, Sherlock made him clearly realize what it meant to be an adult. The times have changed. Sherlock just turned around and took out a huge Gatling machine gun in his hand. Before Thor could react, Sherlock quickly launched the blasting warlock style, forming a light curtain composed of magic patterns in front of Sherlock. When Thor felt that something was wrong and wanted to throw a hammer to hit Sherlock, Sherlock pulled the trigger with a grim smile. Under the blessing of magic, the Gatling guns, that were originally just ordinary bullets, turned into grenades at this moment. The huge explosion and smoke quickly drowned Thor. Coupled with the special effects of the magic, the Asgard warriors realized for the first time what it meant to be surrounded by fire suppression. Almost all the Asgard warriors couldn't help but rub their teeth when they saw this scene, and their eyes twitched when they saw the smoke in the center of the fire. Fortunately, Sherlock restrained himself a little. The blessing of the blasting technique was not enough, and the Gatling bullet was not a full power egg, but just an ordinary .22, which could not break the defense of Thor's armor, but it was definitely painful. Sherlock grinned and fired a full 1,000 bullets. Only then did he put the Gatling in his library with satisfaction, and lifted his magic. The whole practice field became so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Everyone in the stands seemed to be expecting Thor to be alive in the smoke and dust and be able to fight back. After all, he would not lose so badly. As if it had received everyone's wishes, the Meowhammer flew out of the smoke at an extremely fast speed, and the wind pressure from the hammer even blew away the smoke, revealing Thor with a bruised face inside. Seeing the Meowhammer flying towards him, although the speed was very fast, Sherlock was very flexible and dodged it by crouching and covering his head. Seeing the Meowhammer flying past his scalp, Sherlock stood up proudly and smiled at Thor with a bruised face, as if asking him what other tricks he had. After seeing that Sherlock seemed to be relaxed, Thor was ecstatic and stretched out his hand to recall the Meowhammer, expecting that the Meowhammer would take advantage of Sherlock's inattention and stab Sherlock from behind. As an old Marvel fan, how could Sherlock not know the characteristics of Meowhammer? Everything was performed for Thor. Seeing Thor make the action of summoning Meowhammer, Sherlock used his perception to spread out and moved sideways the moment he sensed that Meowhammer was flying towards his back. He also did not forget to leave an armor-piercing spell at the moment of moving sideways. At the moment when the armor-piercing spell appeared, both Thor and the audience on the stage changed their faces, especially Thor, whose expression gradually changed from complacency to horror, and he wanted to cancel the summoning action of Meowhammer in a panic. But unfortunately, Thor's reaction was still a step slow. After the Meowhammer passed through the spell left by Sherlock, it gained an extremely fast acceleration, almost turning into a grey straight line, and hitting Thor's face hard. With the Meowhammer embedded in Thor's face, and under the influence of the huge routine, Thor was directly carried by his Meowhammer, and flew a long way, before falling to the ground. Sherlock then showed a smug look on his face, and made a contemptuous gesture towards Thor with an unusual arrogance. Humph, a poor student wants to trick me. No way. After saying that, he left the practice field without looking back. Instead, the people in the stands rushed to the field to rescue Thor, who had been knocked unconscious by his hammer. But when everyone arrived at the field, they were in trouble. Seeing the Meowhammer firmly embedded in Thor's face, everyone began to think about how to send Thor to the infirmary. Chapter 61 The Life of the Salty Fish Wizard in Asgard. 4. Everyone had a heated discussion about how to get Thor to the infirmary. In the end, a drunkard who liked to drink beer as water during training stood up. After 2 barrels of beer were poured down, Thor, who was knocked unconscious by his own hammer, finally woke up. After all, if Thor didn't wake up, someone would have to find Odin. After all, only Thor and Odin could lift the Meow Meow hammer. Seeing that Thor had woken up, everyone began to help Thor pull the hammer out of his face. Some of the guys lifted his wrist, some lifted his arm, and some helped Thor hold the hammer tightly. In short, with everyone's efforts, the Meow Meow hammer finally left his owner's face, and everyone saw Thor's horrible face under the Meow Meow hammer. They threw the Meow Meow hammer in the training ground. Anyway, no one could take it away, so everyone was not worried about losing it. They found 2 spears and armor to make a simple stretcher and threw the already miserable Thor on the stretcher. Then everyone ran frantically towards the infirmary. It took less than half an hour for the entire training ground to go from being bustling with people at the beginning to being empty and quiet now. In the empty training ground, only the Meow hammer was left alone. It can be said that it was a very miserable hammer. Thor was rushed to the hospital here, and Sherlock on the other side was not feeling well either. He forced himself to return to his room. The moment the door of the guest room was closed, the smug smile on Sherlock's face disappeared without a trace in an instant, as if he had changed his face and turned pale in an instant. Even his forehead was covered with sweat, and the whole person looked like noodles. For a moment, Sherlock felt his knees soften, and he knelt down with a plop. Then he felt as if all his strength was taken away at once, and his upper body fell to the ground, as if he had no bones. The final result was that Sherlock was lying on the floor in his room with his butt sticking out in an extremely weird posture. To be honest, if Sherlock's face was not so pale now, and even the sweat had wet the clothes on his back, others might really think that Sherlock had some unknown hobby. As for why Sherlock was like this, the reason was also very simple. He pretended too much, and his blue bar was at the bottom. Isn't it just funny that a fun person has to imitate Long Ocean? When Sherlock came to Asgard and saw Thor, he knew one thing. After knowing his identity as a wizard, this guy would definitely not be able to help practicing with him. Therefore, when Sherlock saw the sequence magic in the library, in addition to thinking of Odin as a being full of bad taste in his heart, he was more of a joy. When he saw this magic, Sherlock formed a set of tactics based on his own firearms in his head. After all, strictly speaking, he was not a member of Camotage. After deciding to give Thor and his group of Asgardians a little bit of shock from the muggles on Earth, Sherlock began to squeeze his rest time with potions day and night and memorize the 2 sets of magic. But during the 3-day experiment, Sherlock understood what it meant to have a perfect ideal, but a tough reality. The magic power consumption of this sequence of magic is actually proportional to the power. Not only that, it is also proportional to the mass of the object launched. In other words, in the case of a single shot, the greater the power, the more magic power is consumed. The more the number of shots, the more magic power is consumed. The heavier the object, the more magic power is consumed. As long as there is enough magic power, there is no problem in turning the 7.62mm warhead fired by the AK-47 into an armor-piercing or high-explosive bomb fired by a tank. Even as long as the magic sequence is optimized, it is not impossible to turn a bullet into a nuclear bomb. After discovering this feature, Sherlock began to arrange tactics against Thor in his mind. Sherlock also gave it a nice name, Saturation Firepower Tactics. And in 3 days, he trained during the day and hid in the guest room at night to transform the Gatling gun he had chosen. After all, Sherlock couldn't hold the original caliber of the Gatling gun for too long, and Sherlock didn't want Thor to be crippled by his great compassion Gatling gun. That's how the .22 caliber bird shooting Gatling gun appeared. During the battle, the reason why Sherlock transformed into so many shadow clones was not only to confuse Thor and make him unable to find his original body, but also to enhance the visual effect and prevent the other group of warriors from looking for trouble with him after this battle. Everything developed according to Sherlock's plan, but the only thing Sherlock didn't expect was the acceleration of Thor's Meow hammer at the end. There Sherlock used the penetration technique. A not very mature example of this thing is to turn a 7.62mm bullet of an AK-47 into the power of a 12.7mm caliber anti-material sniper rifle under the blessing of magic. This is also the limit that Sherlock can do at present. But obviously, Sherlock overlooked one thing, that is the characteristics of the Meow Meow hammer. You know, that thing is theoretically the core of a planet, and its weight is obvious. Therefore, because of the Gatling gun's firepower coverage, Sherlock's blue bar had already gone down by more than half. When accelerating the Meow Meow hammer, Sherlock directly performed a wave of what is called the blue bar disappearing technique. Sherlock couldn't even maintain the spell, and the magic knight on the Meow Meow hammer only completed a small part. Fortunately, this small part of magic was enough for Thor to miscalculate the landing point of the Meow Meow hammer, and the result was that the Meow Meow hammer fell out of his hand and hit his face, ending the battle. Seeing Thor fall down, Sherlock almost forced himself to complete his last pretentious journey, acting like a normal person all the way, until he returned to the house and fell to the ground. After lying on the ground for a long time, Sherlock felt that he had slowly recovered a little strength. Just like a boneless maggot, he began to slowly crawl on the ground. It took a lot of effort to correct the extremely embarrassing posture to a lying position on the ground. Fortunately, the floor of the guest room was covered with soft carpets, so Sherlock didn't catch a cold. I won't pretend again next time. Sherlock sighed briefly and fell into a deep sleep. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 62, The Life of the Salty Fish Wizard in Asgard. 5. Sherlock slept for a whole day, and it was not until the next morning that Sherlock felt that he had barely recovered. When Sherlock saw Thor again, it was already noon. Thor was sweating profusely on the training ground with a black eye. Because of Sherlock's little shock, Thor even used his connections to find a lot of archers to increase the difficulty of actual combat. Everything was moving in a good direction. Thor was also shocked by Sherlock's muggle weapons from Earth. No, it should be said that the entire Asgard warriors were shocked by Sherlock's bombing. When Sherlock came to the training ground, he saw that no one was lazy. They were all sweating profusely while training with Thor. The only problem might be that the black eye on Thor's face was too distracting. Sherlock really couldn't help laughing. I don't know why. These days, Sol Lake is very sensitive to laughter, and almost the next second after Sherlock laughed, it locked the source of the laughter. However, after seeing that it was Sherlock who laughed, Thor could only end the fight, scratched his head awkwardly, and walked towards Sherlock. He walked in front of Sherlock, and saw that Sherlock seemed to be laughing more and more unbridled, so Thor said unhappily, "Stop laughing, bastard, it's all your fault." After hearing Thor's complaint, Sherlock was glad that he succeeded in pretending to be cool and didn't fall down in front of this group of people, but on the surface he tried to restrain his laughter. But under such a contrast in his heart, how could Sherlock hold back his laughter? In the end, he broke through his defense and laughed loudly while holding his stomach. Thor's fists were hardened, and he had already begun to weigh the Meow hammer in his hand, as if he was planning how to hit the annoying guy in front of him. Fortunately, Sherlock still had some sense. After laughing for a long time, he slowly stopped laughing and patted Thor on the shoulder and said, okay, I won't laugh anymore. Don't look at me like that. I just don't understand. Asgard's medical technology is obviously very advanced. Why don't you just heal this before coming out? Sherlock said as he used his hand to simulate the range of Thor's black eye on his face. It would have been fine if Sherlock didn't say anything. As soon as Thor said it, his forehead was full of black lines. He looked at Sherlock unhappily and said, "Do you think I don't want to? It's not that it's not cured, it's that there is no way to treat it. Asgard's medical technology is great, and as long as you are still breathing, the doctors will not let you die. But who do you think will have time to study how to quickly heal bruises and the like?" Hearing Thor's complaint, Sherlock was also stunned for a moment, and then reacted. It was true, just like no one in the hospital on Earth would study how to make bruises disappear immediately and how to quickly heal a small wound less than 1 centimeter. But Sherlock would not let go of such a good opportunity to mock Thor. Although hospitals don't study these things, it doesn't mean that ordinary people won't. He took out 2 things from his library and threw them to Thor. Thor looked at Sherlock with a confused look on his face, a bottle and an egg that Sherlock threw to him. He looked at Sherlock with a puzzled look. "What is this? Why did you throw an egg to me?" Hearing Thor's question, Sherlock said unhappily, "Roll the egg when it's fine, apply hot compress at night, and then apply the potion in your hand. It will heal quickly." After hearing Sherlock's words, Thor finally understood the use of the things in his hand. He immediately put the egg on the black marks around his eyes and began to roll it slowly. While rolling the egg, he held the bottle in his hand with his other hand and began to observe it. "Sherlock, I never knew you were a pharmacist and had such a healing potion." Sherlock almost couldn't hold back Thor's flattery. After trying to put away his smile, he continued to speak. "Then you are overthinking. This thing is not made by me. This thing is a potion developed by a big country in the east of the earth for traumatic injuries. Remember to apply hot compress before going to bed at night, and be careful not to get it in your eyes." Although Sherlock told Thor very seriously, it was obvious that Thor did not listen to Sherlock's instructions carefully. He repeatedly looked at the red potion in the bottle and stuffed it into his clothes. Sherlock did not care too much about Thor's behavior of ignoring his doctor's advice. After all, if Thor did not listen to him, the potion called safflower oil would definitely teach Thor a new life. After collecting the potion, Thor finally reacted and looked at Sherlock in confusion and asked, "By the way, Sherlock, what do you want to see me for?" In Thor's impression, Sherlock has perfectly mastered the 2 magics of Asgard and does not need to come to the practice field to practice anymore. Moreover, Sherlock is a wizard. Unlike the warriors, who need an excellent body, wizards ultimately rely on magic. His brother Loki has never bothered to come to the practice field. After hearing Thor's question, Sherlock showed a little embarrassment. After all, he beat him up a few days ago. Now he has to ask Thor for help. Sherlock is still a little embarrassed, but there is no way. He is unfamiliar with the place. Sherlock has been here for almost a month, and he has not even stepped out of the castle. Sherlock has not forgotten to buy gifts for Lorna, and Lorna has bought them. So can his uncles not buy them? Can Tony not buy them? So Sherlock's mission this time is still very heavy. But unfortunately, Sherlock does not have the currency of Asgard, and he can't use money in the castle. He has no choice but to come to Thor, who is a local. Thor, who understood the situation, turned his eyes and patted Sherlock on the shoulder and said that he would take Sherlock shopping early tomorrow morning and all the expenses would be covered by his uncle Thor. As Thor's friend, Sherlock knew there must be something wrong with Thor's appearance, no matter how stupid he was. After taking a deep breath, Sherlock looked at Thor and said, "Tell me, what are your conditions?" Thor was stunned for a moment after being pointed out by Sherlock, and then his face, which was exactly the same as Zhu Jinjiang's, was burning like a monkey's butt, watching Sherlock constantly twisting and turning. Fortunately, under Sherlock's constant questioning, Thor finally stated his request and wanted Sherlock to bring a letter to Jane when he returned to express his longing. Sherlock, who had eaten a mouthful of dog food, had a Spartan face. He should have known better than not to ask. He looked at Thor, who was emitting the sour smell of love, with a bad temper. Sherlock casually took out a pair of sunglasses from his library as a deposit and threw it to Thor, then turned and left. Chapter 63 The Life of the Salty Fish Wizard in Asgard. 6. That night, a scream resounded throughout the palace of Asgard. Sherlock, who was lying on the bed and looking at the magic book in his hand, naturally heard this miserable howl. There is no need to think that it was Thor who did not listen carefully to Sherlock's words. After all, it is not a pleasant feeling to have safflower oil in the eyes. Don't ask Sherlock how he knew it. The question is that Sherlock also experienced the same pain as Thor when he was trained by his uncles, but Sherlock even felt that his research was about to burn, and even suspected that he had overused the Manger Key Sharingan. Of course, the Manger Key was just Sherlock's fantasy, but it was really unpleasant. After hearing Thor's miserable howl, Sherlock also closed the magic book in his hand with satisfaction and huddled into his quilt with unusual satisfaction. Well, the quilt tonight is particularly soft and warm. The next morning, Sherlock was pulled out of his warm and soft bed by Thor. Before Sherlock could get angry, Thor's miserable appearance had already caught Sherlock's eye. Although Thor's black eye had healed for the most part, one of Thor's eyes was swollen like a sad frog because of the safflower oil that accidentally got into his eyes. The moment Sherlock saw Thor's miserable appearance, he lost all his temper and laughed in bed. Thor could only look at Sherlock unhappily and put on the sunglasses that Sherlock gave him, covering his sad frog-like eyes. Seeing that his fun was gone, Sherlock took a long time to get up and wash and change clothes under Thor's urging, and then went to the cafeteria to have breakfast under Thor's guidance. It was not until the two of them finished breakfast and arrived at the gate of the palace that Sherlock truly experienced that Thor was the prince of the entire Asgard. The extremely luxurious carriage at the gate showed Thor's identity. Even in Sherlock's opinion, this carriage was more luxurious than the carriage that brought Guyi and himself to the palace. Thor got into the carriage in a flash and called Sherlock to get in the car quickly. You know, the commercial district is not close to the palace, and it takes a while to run there. Sherlock naturally followed suit. The carriage ran on the road in Asgard for a long time before it came to a busy neighborhood. Thor took Sherlock and jumped off the carriage and told the driver to wait for them on the side. The whole street looked like a pedestrian street, with merchants hawking on both sides. After Thor finished instructing the driver, he took Sherlock and began to rush into the street to buy goods. After all, this is where he grew up. Although Thor is a prince of Asgard, he does not have the feeling of extravagance and debauchery of some princes. Instead, he is unusually down to earth. He kept introducing Sherlock to the things sold in the shops on both sides. With the dog owners around him helping him pay, Sherlock naturally would not be polite. He began to happily shop and bought a lot of exquisite accessories unique to Asgard. Then he bought a set of soft armor produced in Asgard for his uncles. This thing is extremely magical. It looks no different from a vest, but according to Thor's introduction, this thing can actually defend against 22 caliber bullets shot 10 meters away. Basically, every warrior in Asgard has such a set of soft armor worn under real armor, which can not only ensure comfort, but also enhance defense. Sherlock saw that this thing is good, and his uncles plus Tony each have 2 pieces. Let's go. The only thing that made the two feel awkward was the Asgard specialty skincare products that Sherlock wanted to give to his future Aunt Pepper. The two straight men really couldn't understand this stuff. Listening to the sales introduction, not to mention Sherlock, even Sol, a local, looked confused. In the end, Sol waved his hand and did a set and pretended to know a lot and told Sherlock to go back and mix it and apply it. Sherlock rolled his eyes in displeasure at Sol's remarks. This stuff can be mixed and applied. Are you really not afraid of being poisoned? But Sherlock appreciated Sol's behavior. He just liked Sol's behavior of being a rich man. And after the goods were packed, Sherlock also gave Sol the wine that he had prepared long ago. Looking at the wine that Sherlock handed over, Sol's eyes began to shine. Especially when the 2 bottles of 75° and 90° alcohol were taken out, Sol's eyes could hardly move away. As a reward for Thor's money, Sherlock repeatedly explained that this thing was used for disinfection, but it was obvious that Thor didn't listen at all, and even complained about why Sherlock didn't take out such strong liquor when he was on Earth. Seeing that the explanation was ineffective, Sherlock no longer struggled. Anyway, Sherlock had confirmed that this thing was edible ethanol, and even if Thor was really greedy and put it into his stomach, it wouldn't be a big problem. The two of them got what they wanted on this trip. When they had nothing to do, Thor took Sherlock to stroll around Asgard, wanting his good friend to feel the customs of Asgard. But while strolling, Sherlock and Thor felt something was wrong, and the cause of the matter was that Sherlock and Thor saw a mother teaching her son a lesson on the road. I saw a young mother holding her son out of a roadside bookstore. The little guy looked aggrieved as he held a pile of books that looked no different from the 5-year college, entrance examination and 3-year simulation books. The young mother was walking in front of him and educating her child. You little bastard. You must study hard. You must know that Prince Thor's friend only took 4 or 5 days to complete the basics of magic and some magic learning, and defeated Prince Thor in 3 days. You must learn from Prince Thor's friend. Study hard. Mom doesn't ask you to be as smart as Prince Thor's friend, but as long as you are like Prince Thor, Mom will be satisfied. Facing his mother's endless education, the little guy felt very aggrieved and muttered softly, I heard that Prince Thor's friend has 3 heads and 8 hands, so he could learn those things in such a short time. Moreover, he defeated Prince Thor with a very strange weapon. Facing the little guy's rebuttal, the mother slapped the little guy on the head and pointed at the book in his hand and said angrily, who cares how many heads and hands he has? He has learned it. You little brat, go home and do 10 pages for me today. Otherwise, I will never let you have dinner. As the mother and son walked away, Sherlock and Thor stood there and expressed their embarrassment. Thor was embarrassed that he lost a battle, and it seemed that the whole Asgard knew about it. As for Sherlock, Sherlock was fine, but did the guy who said he had 3 heads and 8 hands dare to stand up and see if my transformation can satisfy your strange XP? Otherwise, it would not be impossible to let the guy who spread the gossip feel the merciful explosive Gatling gun of the same model as Thor's 22. Chapter 64 The Life of the Salty Fish Wizard in Asgard. 7. After hearing the mother and son's discussion about themselves, both Sherlock and Thor lost interest in continuing to walk. After all, rumors are really magical, especially those about themselves. When you don't know, you won't care about anything strange around you. Once you know the content of the rumor, the strangers around you will feel something is wrong, even if they just look at you. Even if you see someone whispering, you will doubt whether the two are spreading your rumors. Although these rumors themselves have no effect on Sherlock and Thor, for Thor, as a warrior, it is normal to lose a practice. As long as he practices hard and doesn't lose on the real battlefield, it's fine. As for Sherlock, he doesn't plan to stay in Asgard anyway, so he doesn't care about his head and arms. In addition to complaining about the imagination of the guy who made up the rumor, he doesn't have any other emotions. But neither Thor nor Sherlock has the social bullishness like Tony, at least not now, and they don't want to stay in this busy commercial street and become a monkey watched by everyone. Therefore, the two of them called the carriage they had come in without hesitation and returned directly to the palace without stopping all the way. Sherlock originally thought that the matter of Asgard would end here, and the remaining thing was to continue to practice his magic and strive to derive his own special spell before leaving. The rest was to stay in the palace and get up on time, eat on time, study on time, and wait for Guyli to pick him up. But if nothing unexpected happened, it would still be an accident. Sherlock never dreamed that he could actually do his old business in Asgard or in the palace of Asgard. In fact, the cause of the incident was the decisive battle between Sherlock and Thor. Almost all the warriors in Asgard saw this battle, including a very famous warrior in Asgard. The only difference from the way Thor and others became famous is that Thor's reckless men are brave and good at fighting, while this guy's because of cowardice. Sherlock had a deep understanding of this weirdo. His initial target was the archer, but he had no talent for archery, and his targets were all new. Except for the target, he could shoot anything else, such as flying insects, passers-by, small animals in the grass, and even but not limited to instructors, superiors, or teammates. Although he learned sequence magic, his accuracy was really lacking, and he was eliminated by the archer group. This weirdo's old father couldn't bear to see his child drinking at home every day, so he helped this weirdo to transfer to a warrior. You can't say it, the old father's vision is awesome. This guy's talent in the warrior profession is simply unparalleled. He can basically learn any technique, as long as he sees it, and he can master it with just a little practice. Even among the warriors in the entire training ground, this guy can fight anyone except Thor, and even Thor can only defeat this guy with the Meow Hammer. But even though he was gifted, he had a poor psychological quality. When he went to the battlefield for the first time, he was scared when he saw the enemy on the opposite side with a hideous face and holding a huge weapon and running towards him. Later, he became famous. He was invincible in the training ground, and the strange name of a little coward in actual combat always floated on his head. And the reason he found for himself was also very strong. He liked to be an archer, and archers did not need to get close to the enemy. Although everyone laughed at his cowardly personality, they also admired his talent. They regarded him as a sparring partner in the practice field, but they did not reject him like archers. But the appearance of Sherlock made this weirdo see a road that had never appeared before. The appearance of firearms made up for his defect of not daring to face the enemy directly. Even when Sherlock fought against Thor, he had already formed a lot of fighting skills related to firearms in his head. It was also for this purpose that this guy found Sherlock in his guest room shortly after Sherlock returned to the palace and expressed his desire to buy the guns in Sherlock's hands. Sherlock never expected that he could make a deal in Asgard, and the soul of Profiteer awakened instantly. He smiled and welcomed this strange warrior into his room and took out a lot of weapons and began to fool him one by one. Introduced them and said that he only accepted barter plus gold transactions. Don't say, under Sherlock's 3-inch tongue fooling, this guy really bought a lot of good things from Sherlock. As for the payment method of this guy, gold is not mentioned. The whole Asgard really has no shortage of this thing. What surprised Sherlock was that this guy took out 5 daggers made by dwarves. Although they were not artifact level weapons like Thor, these daggers were enough to surprise Sherlock. Because of this, Sherlock happily agreed to the deal, and in the end, this guy took away a 5.56 caliber Gatling, 2 axe series rifles, 2 pistols, and countless ammunition. After completing this business, Sherlock originally thought that the matter was over, but what he never expected was that this was actually the beginning of his becoming the only arms dealer in Asgard. The reason is also very simple. After this guy got the weapons from Sherlock, he performed a gunfight and sequence magic in the training ground the next day, and said that he could also cover everyone behind the team in the future. Everyone saw that those strange weapons of Thor's friends could be sold. That had to be done. Although he didn't know sequence magic, he stuffed this little thing called a pistol into his crotch, and he might be able to defeat the enemy on the battlefield. It was for this reason that Sherlock's weapon store was successfully opened in the Palace of Asgard. Because he was finally able to hold his head high, he even showed off to the team of archers that he had been kicked out of. After all, compared to bows and arrows, the 3-point aiming of guns was much more convenient. Sherlock could even provide sights and calibration services. Chapter 65. The Life of the Salty Fish Wizard in Asgard. 8. Under the constant promotion of this product, Sherlock's arms business in the Palace of Asgard has gradually turned into an industrial chain. Thanks to Sherlock's love for firearms at the beginning of his journey, Sherlock's library has collected a lot of firearms, and because of this, Sherlock's business has begun to grow. For archers, Sherlock recommends firearms from the World War II period. The speed of pulling the bolt is faster than that of bows and arrows, but it is not as fast as automatic rifles that consume too much blue bar. The weight of the bullet is lower than that of arrows, so it is also welcomed by archers. Sherlock even gave different prices according to the model of the firearm. The M1 is more expensive than the 98K because of its speed of fire. Compared with the M1, various sniper rifles with modern technology are much more expensive than the M1. Even for sniper rifles, semi-automatic ones are a little more expensive than those with bolts. Of course, the most powerful anti-material sniper rifles are still the most powerful ones in terms of price. Similarly, semi-automatic ones are much more expensive than those with bolts. As for the warriors, Sherlock took out pistols of various calibers, from .2 to caliber P20 to .50 caliber Desert Eagle, and even high-end versions such as Terran Tactics. Pistols, which are easy to carry and can sneak up on people, have been very popular among the warriors. Even under the blessing of that strange flower, many warriors have even learned a hand-to-hand combat. Of course, in addition to warriors and archers, Asgard's magician troops naturally cannot be left behind. Although they disdained Sherlock's firearms at first, as time passed, they watched the archers and warriors' combat effectiveness increase because of Sherlock's firearms. Naturally, they gradually became restless. They began to find Sherlock and express their needs, and wanted to buy firearms. Facing this group of magicians who were afraid of being close, Sherlock certainly would not refuse. What could be more suitable for this group of magicians than a spray gun? Even if the marbles are too weak, there are still single-headed bullets here, plus the explosives in Sherlock's hands. such as grenades, flash bombs, smoke bombs and other gadgets, each of which makes these wizards fascinated. With the help of Sherlock, the style of the whole Asgard began to gradually become a little wrong. Of course, this has nothing to do with Sherlock. Don't you see that the God King Odin faced Sherlock and sold arms in his palace openly, and he didn't say much. Sherlock can be said to be very satisfied with his life. After all, the collection in Sherlock's library can prove this very well. Although it can't catch up with Odin's treasure house, there are still a few good things. There are even a few magic books of Asgard. Apart from Sherlock's inexplicable business in Asgard, and because of the good business, he didn't have much time to continue practicing his magic. The only source of dissatisfaction for Sherlock may be Thor. After all, after a whole day of entertaining guests, it was finally dark, and they were going to rest, but Thor came to Sherlock's room uninvited, and disturbed Sherlock's rest. Anyone would feel uncomfortable, especially since Thor came here for no other reason but to ask Sherlock to bring Jane's love letter, which made people even more annoyed. Sherlock was really enlightened. In his 2 lifetimes, it was the first time Sherlock saw a muscular man standing in front of him, reciting a love letter he wrote with deep affection and full of emotion, and also asked him to comment on it. He was just reciting, but the most important thing was that he was holding a bottle of alcohol given to him by Sherlock in his other hand, and he took a sip from time to time while reciting. Sherlock almost watched the alcohol in Thor's hand change from 75 degrees to 90 degrees, and finally to 99 degrees. And the most slutty thing is that this guy comes every night, and the love letter every night is different. If it weren't for the opening of every time, "Dear Jane," Sherlock would even think that Thor was hinting at something. The most important thing is that Thor, as a barbarian who swings a hammer, is hard to describe the level of love letters. It even developed to the point that Sherlock thought it was almost the same as pornographic novels. Sherlock was speechless about this. Sherlock didn't want to know about the details of Thor and Jane's life, not to mention that Thor wanted Sherlock to comment on it. Sherlock didn't try to escape. The final result was that Sherlock lay on the bed holding the meow hammer on his chest and listened to Thor's extremely mushy love letter very patiently. Finally, after a whole week of bombardment, Sherlock finally said that he couldn't stand it anymore. On the last day, he interrupted Thor's affectionate recitation and pulled Thor's love letter in a bad mood. He used the love letter template he saw before crossing to polish Thor. Although this polishing is not much different from rewriting a new one. But at least Sherlock and Thor were very satisfied, and at Thor's request, a lot of earthy love words were added. In order to stop Thor from bothering him again, and to stop experiencing lying on the bed with a genuine meow hammer on his chest, listening to Zhu Jinjiang, a peerless macho man with an arm that can run a horse. He recited a love letter to himself affectionately and emotionally, which was extremely muscular and even detailed. He also asked himself to comment on it. Sherlock almost put all his Chinese language skills from his 2 lifetimes into this love letter. Fortunately, the final result was still good. Thor took Sherlock's writing and was amazed by the polished love letter. He happily ran back to prepare the packaging of the love letter. Sherlock himself was finally able to have a quieter time and no longer had to endure the situation that was easy to make people think wrongly. But Sherlock's good days did not last for a few days. Ancient One came to the palace of Asgard as promised, ready to take Sherlock back to Earth. The good news is that the weapons in Sherlock's library have been sold for various armors and cold weapons with magic runes from Asgard. The bad news is that before Sherlock was about to leave, Thor took out a pink envelope with beautiful packaging from his arms and handed it to Sherlock solemnly in front of everyone. God knows how ugly Sherlock's face was at that time. If there was a mirror, Sherlock would probably find that his face would also turn colorful. Chapter 66 Return Home. Finally, Sherlock's face was almost green, and he put the letter handed over by Thor into his arms with a ferocious look, and fled through the portal under the strange eyes of Ancient One, Odin, and Frigga. Fortunately, the other side of the teleportation opened by Ancient One was Kamataj, and Sherlock did not meet any familiar people, otherwise Sherlock would probably stay there and start endless avatar as a full-time world-destroying demon king. Sherlock, who returned to Kamataj, drew a small portal, and stole an ordinary brown paper envelope from the library, managed by the king, and stuffed Thor's love letter into the brown paper envelope unhappily. Ancient One, who came out of the portal, naturally saw Sherlock's actions, and the strange look returned to normal. It didn't look like what she imagined. After sealing the brown paper envelope, Sherlock seemed to remember something, and a smirk appeared on his face. Seeing that Ancient One close the portal, Sherlock immediately took out his wand from his library. Gently tapping the brown paper envelope, with the blessing of permanent transformation, the plain brown paper envelope was transformed into a familiar courier envelope in almost an instant. The 3 letters M's were clearly visible on the pure white envelope, and even the sender's address and the recipient were clearly written. After casually drawing a portal the size of an arm, Sherlock threw the letter directly into it. Because the portal has a feature that, if you need to find someone, as long as you think about the person's appearance and name in your heart, the portal can generally automatically locate the person's position. Don't you see that in Spider-Man: No Return? The fat boy Ned, who had never been exposed to magic, was able to find the 2 generations of Spider-Man who had traveled through time and space for the first time. This is the principle. Therefore, Sherlock was not worried about sending the letter to the wrong place. But what Sherlock didn't know was that Jane and the Doctor had already started to study the cosmic cube for SHIELD at this time. The letter that Sherlock sent through the portal was discovered by Jane and the black salted egg at the same time. Black boiled egg had no interest in the pink love letter with a very high literary level. He just left in a hurry with a gloomy face holding the envelope with M's printed on it. Sherlock would never have thought that, because of his little prank, a dignified oxygen boss would have to face a 4-court trial by his immediate boss, the space agency, the security bureau, and black boiled egg. It was just to prove that his company really did not have the ability to deliver interstellar letters, and there was no agent like 007 who could bypass the layers of security measures of S.H.I.E.L.D. and put the letter on the recipient's desk silently. For this matter, the poor head of the person in charge almost had his head pulled out from the Mediterranean to the same hairstyle as the Ancient One. Of course, these are all later stories. For Sherlock, it was just a fun thing for him. Only the green light on the Ancient One flashed extremely obscurely, and then his expression became very strange as he looked at Sherlock, as if he was trying his best to restrain something. Sherlock didn't know what the Ancient One had done, so he just thought that the Ancient One was still surprised that Thor had handed him a love letter in public. After hurriedly saying goodbye to the Ancient One, he opened a portal and disappeared in camouflage. Sherlock didn't know that after he left, the green light on the Ancient One's body increased, and a smile that he had never had before hung on his face. He closed his eyes and kept manipulating the time stone, but for some reason, the smile on his face looked more and more like he was having fun. The location where Sherlock opened the portal was just in his room. After more than a month of absence, there was no dust in Sherlock's room. It was obvious that someone often helped him clean it. Throwing himself directly on his big bed, Sherlock couldn't help but sigh that his doghouse was still more comfortable. After lying on the bed for a while, Sherlock simply took a shower, changed into clean clothes, and opened the window to feel the slightly polluted air in New York, sighing that it was good to be home. He slowly opened the room and started to walk downstairs. On the one hand, Sherlock needed to share the gifts with his uncles and the little girls. On the other hand, Sherlock planned to find Price to replenish his library with another batch of goods. After going downstairs, the first person Sherlock saw was Skye, who was still sitting at the cashier. Skye was very surprised to see Sherlock coming downstairs. She stared at Sherlock with wide eyes. "When did you come back?" Faced with Skye's question, Sherlock could only laugh it off and casually threw a lady's necklace he brought back from Asgard to Skye. Soon Skye was attracted by the exquisiteness of the lady's necklace that Sherlock gave her as a souvenir. She automatically ignored Sherlock and began to study the necklace in his hand. Sherlock gave Skye a necklace that could be opened and closed. 2 to 3 photos could be placed in the necklace. Sherlock knew that Skye was obsessed with his biological parents and was even looking for them. In Sherlock's words, Skye can put their photos and her own in the necklace after finding her parents, and the material of the necklace is extremely hard, so there is no need to worry about any damage. After Sherlock explained the purpose of the necklace, Skye expressed her love for the necklace and directly put it on her neck and said that she would take a photo of herself and put it in it when she rested. After getting Skye's gift, Sherlock began to ask about the whereabouts of others. It would have been better if he didn't ask. As soon as Sherlock asked, Skye's face immediately put on a particularly meaningful smile and said that several people were in the physical training ground behind, and Sherlock could see his uncles directly when he went there. Although Skye looked like a treacherous expression, as if he had eaten a colleague's love affair in the workplace, and he also understood that there was something in the training ground behind that he didn't know about. But helplessly, no matter how Sherlock asked, Skye looked like "I don't know, don't ask me, and I won't tell you if you ask me." He just looked like he was eating a melon and didn't answer any of Sherlock's questions. Helplessly, Sherlock could only sigh, take a deep breath, and then strode towards the physical training ground behind. Anyway, he would be stabbed if he stuck his head out, and he would be stabbed if he hid his head. Sherlock wanted to see what kind of monster could make Skye show such an expression. Chapter 67 Achievement, Lolly Collector. Under Skye's strange smile, Sherlock walked towards the training ground with a confused mind. As soon as he arrived at the physical training ground, Sherlock became Spartan. At this time, there were a lot of strong men training in the muddy training ground. However, the most eye-catching people in the training ground were not those strong men covered with mud. Instead, they were two Lalita girls. One of them had green hair and was holding a pink airy rifle with Hello Kitty printed on it, constantly shooting at the sky. While shooting, she kept insulting the strong men who were climbing the barbed wire in a prone position. It was Lorna, who hadn't been seen for a long time. But not far from Lorna, who looked much younger than Lorna, had a golden bob haircut, and was holding a pink AK rifle with Pink Panther printed on it. Who was that Lalita girl? Moreover, this little girl who is much younger than Lorna is much more sturdy than Lorna. You can see that the pink AK is not an ordinary magazine, but a huge pink drum. And that guy cursed much more dirty than Lorna. Sherlock had the expression of an old man on the subway. He had only been out for a month, and there was a little girl inexplicably. Could it be that a creature like a little girl would split itself? Sherlock, who was standing next to the field, quickly attracted the attention of Lorna and the golden-haired little girl. Seeing Sherlock's Spartan expression staring at his friend not far away, Lorna pressed the intercom on her body and said something in a bad mood. After a while, Soap, who was on the other side of the training ground, ran to Sherlock with a look of surprise and hugged the confused Sherlock without saying anything. "You're finally back, brat. If you don't come back, Price will probably start issuing a global wanted order to see where you've gone." Sherlock simply rolled his eyes at Soap's words and almost subconsciously determined one thing, that is, the extra lolly must have an unspeakable relationship with Soap. "Okay, I understand your worries, but can you tell me first, where did the extra lolly come from?" Seeing Sherlock's face, Soap explained to Sherlock with a guilty look on his face that the lolly's name was Mindy McCready, and she was the daughter of his good brother when he was a recruit. His good brother died in an accident, and the little lolly Mindy was adopted by a policeman after helping his father to avenge his father. But because his good brother never let Mindy go to school since she was a child, she learned all the things in the army, even including fighting firearms and other things, so Mindy was not very adaptable in school. After knowing this, he immediately went to the family and proposed to adopt Mindy. Seeing that Soap had a military background and the boss had a relationship with Tony Stark, the policeman agreed to Soap's request. Because of this, during the time Sherlock was away, a violent Lalita inexplicably appeared in Sherlock's gun shop. Sherlock's mouth twitched as he listened to Soap's explanation. Sherlock recognized who this violent Lalita was halfway through the explanation. Wasn't she Hit Girl from Kick-Ass? Proud of Price's good start, his place, which was originally a macho club, had inexplicably begun to transform into a Lalita gathering place. Sherlock even suspected that, if he had a system, a big achievement would pop up on his head at this moment. Ding, congratulations to the host for achieving the achievement, Lalita Collector. Wearing this achievement will gain the favor of Lalita, but there is a chance to trigger the negative buff, starting from 3 years, and up to death penalty. To be honest, at this moment Sherlock has even begun to doubt whether he has some strange system that attracts Lolita. Obviously he likes beautiful big sisters. Sherlock has even begun to consider whether he can contact Deadpool and pay him to steal back the Catwoman version of Anne Hathaway next door. After all, Anne's Catwoman is really the best. When Sherlock was lost in his thoughts were interrupted by Soap, who mistakenly thought that Sherlock seemed to be entangled in Mindy's stay and was quite sad to Sherlock. Okay, Sherlock, if you don't like Mindy living here, I will take Mindy home. After all, she is my good brother's daughter, and I can't let Mindy live on the streets. Looking at Soap's poor acting skills, Sherlock rolled his eyes at Soap in annoyance, and then waved his hand to indicate that it didn't matter. Anyway, the room was big enough, and it was just a matter of adding more chopsticks. The most important thing was that Mindy was here to keep Lorna company. Sherlock was really afraid that Lorna, a good North Star, would be raised astray by these rough guys, although hit girl Mindy had already been raised astray. Seeing that Sherlock agreed, Soap quietly gave Lorna and Mindy a thumbs up behind their backs, indicating that he had dealt with Sherlock. At this moment, both Lorna and Mindy breathed a sigh of relief. For Lorna, she quite liked this peer who was not much different from herself. At least when Sherlock teased her, she had a reliable ally. For Mindy, compared to an ordinary family, ordinary school, and ordinary life, Mindy undoubtedly prefers the environment here at Sherlock. Whether it is the dazzling array of firearms or the training methods that have never been seen before, Mindy is intoxicated. After solving Mindy's problem, Sherlock was not polite and immediately called Soap, Mindy and Lorna to come and share the gifts. Of course, there was a little episode in the middle. Whether it was Mindy or Lorna, the two seemed to have no interest in the extremely exquisite accessories brought back by Sherlock, but they were extremely interested in the armor and weapons brought back by Sherlock. Sherlock absolutely could not allow the two Lolita to become like macho men in the end, and began to argue with the two Lolita. As long as it was Lorna, Mindy could only play auxiliary because of the unfamiliar relationship. In the end, Sherlock compromised. After all, whether it was Mindy or Lorna, their lives in the future would definitely not be as dull as ordinary people. Because of this, Sherlock finally gave Mindy and Lorna each a dagger of the best quality he brought from Asgard, as well as 2 sets of female armor. As for Soap, it was very simple. The bulletproof vest he bought, plus a few sets of armor and some weapons like daggers. The defense of Asgard's armor should not be underestimated. Under the same weight, it is even better than the best bulletproof insert. Therefore, Sherlock's gift can be said to be sent to Soap's heart. After getting the gifts for several people, Sherlock began to inquire about the whereabouts of other uncles. It doesn't matter if he doesn't ask. When he asked, Soap and the two Lolita showed the same smile as Sky and looked at Sherlock. Sherlock's hair stood up almost instantly. Could there be Lolita waiting for him somewhere else? Sherlock has even seen the scene of his gun store becoming a Lolita kindergarten in the near future. Fortunately, Soap didn't let Sherlock continue to fantasize. He pointed to the closed tactical training base not far away that looked like a huge hangar, and said to Sherlock, "Where are the others? You can go and see. Maybe you will meet your idol." Chapter 68 Captain Idol? Sherlock was confused after hearing what Soap said, and even began to recall all the people he admired from before to after he traveled through time. He even exaggerated to the point that he counted all the teachers who played in live-action movies, but he still didn't think of who his idol was. Even under Sherlock's wild thoughts, he didn't know how to recall all the Black history before and after he traveled through time. Although it was not visible on the surface, Sherlock had actually dug out a manor in his shoes. Seeing that Sherlock seemed to be thinking about all kinds of things on the spot, Soap, who watched Sherlock grow up, felt that it was quite interesting. After all, it was rare to see Sherlock like this. After all, when he was with them, Sherlock mostly looked like a salted fish who had lost his dream. Although it was already seen that Sherlock seemed to be thinking more and more crooked under the blessing of his imagination, Soap did not have any intention of stopping him. Instead, he looked at Sherlock with a funny and evil look on his face. "Okay, don't think about those things. Go and see where Price and the others are. You know, Price may be old and miss you a lot. Soap urged Sherlock and kept pushing Sherlock out with his hands until they left the huge physical training ground. With a little force from Soap, Sherlock accidentally stumbled. Just as he stood still, Sherlock heard the sound of the wire mesh door closing behind him. Sherlock looked back with a question mark on his forehead. How come he looked like he was kicked out? It didn't matter if he didn't look at it, but when he looked at it, Sherlock became uneasy because Soap, who was standing behind the iron door, had a smirk on his face. God knows how lethal a tough guy with a mohawk can be when he smirks. The moment Sherlock saw Soap's smile, he even subconsciously wanted to take out his wand and give the other side an abada. Fortunately, Sherlock still had the most basic rationality and used reason to stop his subconscious thoughts. He looked at Soap, who was standing on the other side of the wire mesh gate with a smirk on his face. Well, it's not against you, my dear Uncle Soap. Can you tell me who is with Uncle Price? And, can you stop laughing? You look too much like the villain boss in the cartoon. It would have been fine if Sherlock didn't say anything, but once he said it, Soap's rebellious thoughts were aroused. He rolled his eyes at Sherlock and turned away from the gate, as if his kindness was taken for granted. No matter how Sherlock shouted on the other side of the iron gate, Soap didn't have any intention of paying attention to Sherlock. He was angry. Humph. The kind that can't be coaxed. Seeing that his Uncle Soap no longer paid attention to him, Sherlock became nervous. God knows what kind of mood Sherlock was in when he walked the not so long road from the physical training ground to the tactical training ground. Until Sherlock put his hand on the huge door on the training ground, Sherlock was preparing himself mentally. After taking several deep breaths, Sherlock felt that, as long as a little girl didn't rush out and hug his thigh and call him daddy after he opened the door, Sherlock could accept whatever was inside. After preparing himself mentally, Sherlock took a deep breath, then sank into his dungeon and suddenly opened the huge door. Inside the door was still the indoor CQB tactical training ground before Sherlock left. The difference was that in the corner, the original waiting area had become a temporary competition arena. At this time, Xiao Qiang, Gates, and Ghost were excitedly wearing heavy protective gear and gathered together to make gestures, as if discussing tactics. On the other side, Price stood on the high platform, his eyes looking at the tactical training ground, with a stopwatch in his hand, constantly saying faster, faster. The gunshots in the entire training ground were constantly firing in a very regular manner. Sherlock's action of pushing open the door of the training ground naturally attracted the attention of several people. The first to react was Xiao Qiang and his three companions who were discussing tactics. Xiao Qiang and his three companions ran towards Sherlock quickly, without even taking off their protective gear. Price, however, did not turn his head immediately, because he had to keep an eye on the training ground. When Xiao Qiang and his three companions ran to Sherlock's side, before they could speak, Price, who was standing on the high platform, spoke first. Soap, if I remember correctly, I should have told you that the client required the training to be kept confidential. Little bastard, you're back. Price thought it was Soap who pushed open the door at first, until he turned around and saw Sherlock standing at the door, and then he immediately changed his tone with a hint of surprise. Originally, Sherlock should have taken the initiative to greet so many elders, but at this moment, Sherlock obviously did not have that intention, even though everyone's eyes were focused on Sherlock. But Sherlock's eyes were clearly focused on the man with huge pectoral muscles who had just finished a CQB tactical drill and was walking out of the exit with a rifle. Looks like you, American idiot, Captain. Steve, who had just finished training, seemed to feel Sherlock's gaze. While wiping his sweat with a towel taken out of his bag, he waved to Sherlock in a friendly manner as a greeting. Sherlock never thought that the so-called idol mentioned by Soap was Captain America, but after thinking about it carefully, there was nothing wrong. The children of the Lighthouse country in Marvel almost grew up listening to the stories of Captain America. Sherlock was naturally no exception, but that was before Sherlock crossed over. What does it have to do with him, Sherlock? It was so mysterious that Sherlock almost thought he was going to be a father. Just as Sherlock waved at Captain America in a daze as a response to Captain America's greeting, Price finally came to Sherlock's side, and the familiar roar of the smoky voice once again exploded in Sherlock's ears. Little bastard, where on earth have you been? I can't get through to you on the phone, and you don't reply to emails. Damn it, if you don't come back, I'm going to issue a global wanted order. Facing Price's roar, Sherlock had no intention of answering at this time. Instead, he quietly pulled Price and pointed at Captain America, who was resting, and asked in a very obscure way, "What's going on? Why is Captain America here? Has S.H.I.E.L.D. contacted you?" Facing Sherlock's 3 consecutive questions, Price rolled his eyes in annoyance and answered Sherlock's questions. "The captain has just woken up and needs systematic training to understand the current tactics and various weapons. We are the best in the country. Where else can they go if not here? As for the group of people from S.H.I.E.L.D., don't worry. Although we don't have much contact with them, it is not completely absent. After all, they're low-level newcomers, or untrusted people will occasionally be sent to training bases like ours for training. As for contact, we have already had contact. You don't have to worry at all. And the most important thing is that S.H.I.E.L.D. has given too much. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 69, Forgotten Things. After hearing what Price said, Sherlock's forehead was full of question marks, and he looked at Price beside him with the expression of an old man on the subway. Sherlock really couldn't imagine that this thing could be outsourced to a private company. After all, before crossing over, these things were all handled by the country. Now that he has crossed over, Sherlock is still a little uncomfortable with such a free atmosphere. Seeing Sherlock's disbelieving look, Price knocked Sherlock's head in annoyance and continued to explain to Sherlock in a low voice, "I usually teach you to pay more attention to business, but you like to fish in the front. I'm so angry. Listen carefully, brat, it's not just S.H.I.E.L.D.K. Fobo will do this. Even the military will occasionally hand over training tasks to private companies. This is common sense. What the hell? This is also possible? No wonder there were rumors in the previous life that the Lighthouse country was a paradise for intelligence personnel. Sherlock has seen it this time. With this kind of behavior, it's no wonder that the good S.H.I.E.L.D. has become the last S.H.I.E.L.D. What's the difference between this and being defenseless? Seeing Sherlock's appearance, that shocked my mother for a whole year. Price began to regret for the nth time that he had not cultivated Sherlock's cognition about these things since he was a child. This led to Sherlock's current innocent appearance about the things hidden under the water. Just when Price wanted to say something, the captain finally packed himself up and came to the side of several people. Looking at Sherlock, who was surrounded by people, he asked in a friendly manner, "Colonel Price, who is this?" Faced with the captain's question, Price also swallowed his thoughts temporarily and began to introduce himself to the captain. "Sherlock Felix, the boss we have seen since childhood, and the actual owner of this place. Sherlock, I think you should know this. Captain America, Steve Rogers." After hearing Price's question, the captain was obviously stunned. He never thought that the owner of such a training base was actually this child who didn't look very old in front of him. Although he was surprised, the captain still extended his hand to Sherlock in a friendly manner. "Hello, I'm Steve." Seeing that the captain was very friendly, just as the rumors on the internet said, Sherlock did not feel disgusted. He could only say that he was worthy of being able to pick up the meow meow hammer. Sherlock stretched out his hand and shook the captain's huge palm tightly, and then he said to the captain, "Sherlock, it's nice to meet you, the idol of the children of the Lighthouse country since childhood, dear Mr. Captain." Listening to Sherlock's teasing, the captain touched his nose a little embarrassedly, but the smile on his face did not fade, as if he was a little surprised that he became a national idol after waking up from a sleep. The first meeting between the two was not bad for Sherlock, at least not as impressive as Iron Man Tony. God knows what Tony was thinking at the time. Uncle took his nephew out to play in front of his aunt. After the two simply greeted each other, they were interrupted by Xiao Qiang excitedly. Compared with Price and others, Xiao Qiang, Gates and Ghost really grew up listening to the deeds of the captain. Moreover, the three of them joined the army under the influence of the captain. Therefore, when facing the captain, Xiao Qiang and the other two were undoubtedly much more excited than Sherlock. Xiao Qiang, for some unknown reason, frantically invited Sherlock to join their team, and later he would have a couplet with the captain. With Sherlock's words, there were exactly 4 people, and the 4 of them could beat up the captain together. Listening to Xiao Qiang's words, Sherlock looked at the youngest uncle in his seat with an expression of looking at a mentally retarded person, leaving aside the captain's physical fitness that was close to the peak of human beings. What kind of thinking can make your 37-degree mouth say such cold and mentally retarded words to beat up someone in front of him? Decisively rejecting Xiao Qiang's invitation, Sherlock said in his heart that he, a wizard, would be crazy to go with you to beat up a warrior. It was rejected, but it did not prevent Sherlock from telling the captain to be a little more ruthless to Xiao Qiang in front of Xiao Qiang. Steve naturally agreed to Sherlock with a smile. After a few days of getting along, the captain naturally understood that Xiao Qiang was just talking without thinking, and he had no malice. He was even a good person and they drank together from time to time. The captain actually had a good feeling towards Price and the others. Getting along with them reminded him of his life in the Howling Commandos. Seeing the captain here, Sherlock couldn't take out the things he brought from Asgard to divide the spoils in front of the captain, so he could only say hello silently and tell Price and the others to find him in the evening for something. After that, Sherlock decisively said goodbye. He couldn't not say goodbye. First of all, the captain looked at him as if he was very interested. Sherlock knew that the captain had worked under Black Egg for a long time with Black Widow. Sherlock didn't want to have any contact with the Black Egg, who was equal to trouble. Secondly, the reason why Sherlock ran so fast was Xiao Qiang, the bastard. Seeing his eager eyes, Sherlock didn't even have to think about it to know that if he didn't leave, this guy would definitely make trouble. After Sherlock said hello, he and the captain added each other's contact information, and then decisively flashed without any hesitation. It was not until the tall door behind him closed that Sherlock breathed a sigh of relief and began to curse Xiao Qiang, the jerk, for almost getting beaten. Damn, since Sherlock had traveled through time, except for the initial training, he had never been beaten. Even in Asgard, it was Sherlock who beat Thor. Xiao Qiang, the jerk, almost made Sherlock break the record. How to fight the captain. Even if the captain didn't use a shield, if he didn't use magic, he would be a player who would go up to deliver food. Sherlock felt that his physical fitness could never beat a player like the captain. Cursing all the way, he walked towards the gun store in front. Just as he pushed open the door leading to the gun store, Sherlock met Skye, who was in a hurry with a letter, and the two almost bumped into each other. Fortunately, the two reacted quickly and stopped their actions in time, so there was no accident. Skye was obviously stunned after seeing Sherlock, then quickly slapped the letter in his hand on Sherlock, and then turned around and left angrily, leaving Sherlock confused. He didn't understand what happened. It was just an accidental collision. If he couldn't figure it out, he didn't think about it. Sherlock picked up the letter that Skye slapped on him and started to read it. It didn't matter if he didn't read it. As soon as he read it, a series of exclamations of OSHXT, OFXXK came out of Sherlock's mouth. As for the reason, it was actually very simple. Sherlock finally remembered what he had forgotten before going to Asgard. His good uncle, Tony the shithead. Chapter 70. Tony is dying. Sherlock held the letter in his hand like a parent who forgot to pick up his child from school and rushed out frantically. Skye was stunned and finally could only shrug his shoulders and prepare to tell the group of people behind him that Sherlock disappeared again. As for what the letter Sherlock saw was, it was actually very simple, an invitation letter plus 2 legal documents. There was nothing much written on the invitation letter, except for an address Sherlock was very familiar with, Tony's Beach Villa. What really broke Sherlock's defense were the 2 documents. One was Tony's inheritance notarization, and the other was an accident insurance. The beneficiaries were Pepper and Sherlock, and the insured was Tony. After seeing the 2 documents, Sherlock remembered that he seemed to have forgotten to leave enough antidote for his dearest uncle, because of the sudden incident, his first alien trip, and the temptation of the Golden Asgard. Sherlock jumped into the Shelby Raptor parked at the door like a frightened bull. Although it had been parked for more than a month, Sherlock's beloved car did not let him down and started immediately. The moment Sherlock started the car, he fully utilized the horsepower of this large pickup truck with a high-power V8 and directly turned around with a burnt tire on the spot. The large pickup truck with a width of 2 meters and a length of nearly 6 meters rushed out as fast as a sports car. Skye, who had just walked out from the back, saw that Sherlock started with a burnt tire and immediately felt bad, but before she could rush out, Sherlock's tailspin interrupted Skye's steps. Looking at the window washed by mud with a bitter face, Skye had already cursed Sherlock in her heart. Sure enough, there is no good boss in the world. Sherlock didn't know about Skye's complaints. At this time, Sherlock had almost stepped on the accelerator to the bottom and rushed towards Tony's beach villa frantically. Someone will definitely ask, why not use magic like portal or portkey apparition, which must be faster than driving? Please, Tony now has a senior agent Black Widow sent by Black Egg by his side. Besides, although Sherlock himself is full of guilt, Tony is not in the IQ, and Sherlock is not that anxious. The fact that he can still hold a banquet is enough to show that Tony is not in a big trouble now, and it can even be said that the toxins in his body are still a little far from the safety line. After a crazy racing, Sherlock finally came to Tony's villa. The good news is that this banquet is called Tony's birthday party, and the situation did not happen like when Sherlock came for the first time. The bad news is that after Sherlock came, Tony had drunk a little too much. At this time, he was standing on the stage in the iron armor and performing how to urinate in the armor. Sherlock saw this scene, and it can be said that there was a black line on his forehead, and a dead memory suddenly attacked him. Sherlock took out a bottle of antidote and mixed it with a muggle hangover remedy. He rushed onto the stage with a dark face and stuffed the bottle into Tony's mouth. Tony didn't see who rushed onto the stage, or even what the liquid was. He just drank it. Seeing that Tony seemed to have drunk the potion, Sherlock helped Tony off the stage with a dark face. Under the blessing of alcohol and the little song, the crowd at the party soon forgot the protagonist of the party and started to party. After Sherlock helped Tony to a corner, Tony sobered up, perhaps because of the hangover remedy or the antidote. Looking at Sherlock who was supporting him, Tony had a lot of questions to ask, but in the end, they all turned into a question. Smelly boy, where have you been for more than a month? Although Tony was very curious about Sherlock's whereabouts, Sherlock obviously didn't want to pay attention to Tony, because Sherlock was now wholeheartedly studying the entry after Tony was fed the potion. Entry, drug resistance, locked, entry effect, because of long-term use of a potion, the body has developed drug resistance, and the potion is 73% ineffective. If you want to restore the full effect of the potion, you need to stop using it for 3 months. Because the entry is locked, there is no time limit for this medication entry, and the potion recovery time will start after 24 hours. Seeing the entry on Tony's head, Sherlock was dumbfounded. To be honest, this was the first time Sherlock saw such a locked entry. Did you drink the antidote I gave you as water, or what? I was away for a month. How much antidote did you drink? Sherlock didn't pay attention to Tony's question about his whereabouts in the past month, but asked Tony with a shocked face. After hearing Sherlock's question, Tony was still very clear-headed, probably because the antidote mistook alcohol as a toxin, even though it lost 73% of its effect. After hearing Sherlock's question, Tony curled his lips, thought for a moment, and then answered. About 1 bottle every 2 days. You know, you left me 10 bottles of antidote, and I later bought 5 more bottles from the people at S.H.I.E.L.D. When Tony said this, Sherlock's eyes almost widened. What? 1 bottle every 2 days? And you bought 5 bottles from S.H.I.E.L.D.? Didn't you sell this stuff to them? You bought it back. Facing Sherlock's questioning, Tony rolled his eyes and retorted unhappily. What can I do? You're missing, and I need to use the Iron Man suit. Using 1 bottle every 2 days is the minimum amount that can ensure that I don't feel uncomfortable. After listening to Tony's dissatisfied complaints, Sherlock patted his forehead helplessly and then asked a tentative question. That is, how much did Tony spend to buy 5 bottles of antidote from Black Egg? After Tony broke out a price, Sherlock's eyes were fucking round. Damn, this Black Egg is definitely shady from the outside to the inside. This price is even more shady than when Tony sold it to them. What is this? The money of the powerful is returned in full, and Tony's money is split 20% and 80%. In the end, after all this time, SHIELD got 10 bottles of white moss potion, 5 bottles of antidote, and 2 bottles of polyjuice potion for free from Sherlock. The more Sherlock thought about it, the angrier he got. Seeing S.H.I.E.L.D. making money was more painful than losing money, especially when it was Tony's money. Sherlock looked at Tony with a look of disappointment. Damn, couldn't you just hold on? Just when Sherlock wanted to teach Tony a lesson, a man came through the madly twisting crowd and came to the two of them. He looked at Sherlock and said, "I'm sorry to interrupt your conversation. Sherlock, can you lend me your Uncle Tony? I need to talk to your uncle about something." The man was Tony's only good friend, Rod, who would later become the complainer in the Avengers. This was not the first time Sherlock had seen this interesting black uncle. After thinking about the plot of Iron Man 2, Sherlock glared at Tony, who was still lying on the sofa, and then stood up and smiled at Rod, turning around and leaving without any hesitation. As for what the two were talking about, Sherlock honestly didn't care at all. He would have been better off asking Jarvis to turn off the music, clear the area to give the two enough space to fight, and ask Jarvis to synthesize a lithium dioxide injection. If Sherlock remembered correctly, it should be this. Since magic was temporarily useless, he could use scientific methods to suppress the toxins in Tony's body. Chapter 71 War Machine, Iron Man and Detoxification. The fact was just as Sherlock thought. Sherlock had just evacuated the revelers at the party, and a silver white unpainted steel armor rushed into the dance floor with a red gold painted steel armor. Sherlock was not worried about the friendly fight between the two good friends. Instead, he took a drink and sat on the sofa to watch with great interest. If it weren't for the fact that there were no sunflower seeds available in America, Sherlock would have grabbed a handful of them, eating sunflower seeds, while watching the two Iron Men grab each other's shoulders and then punch each other's face shields. The good fight between the steel armors was turned into a round-based battle by the two. Sherlock even finished the drink in his hand, and the two were still playing such a round-based battle. The most important thing is that the two punched each other, and after a long time, nothing happened to them. Except for a few scratches on their armors, there was no problem at all. Finally, Sherlock couldn't stand the two people's perfunctory work. The fight between elementary school students is more interesting than you two. The fighting level between Tony and Rhodes is at most the level of kindergarten senior class, and it is even a bit insulting to kindergarten senior class. Sherlock sat on the sofa and clapped his hands vigorously, which attracted the attention of the two children who were playing the friendship face-breaking punch game. Seeing that the two stopped and looked at him, Sherlock spread his hands to the two people and said, "Why don't you take off your armor and fight? Otherwise, what are you doing here punching each other? Add scratches to the armor?" Sherlock's words made Rhodes very embarrassed. He came to persuade Tony. As Tony's good friend, and Rhodes secretly put on this iron armor himself, he was already guilty, so he didn't dare to use force when hitting Tony. That's why he was playing the game of you punch me, I punch you with Tony. Otherwise, he was a soldier after all. Although he was in the Air Force, he was not bad at fighting. Not only Rhodes, but even Tony felt embarrassed. Seeing his nephew holding an empty cup and sitting on the sofa impatiently watching the two people fighting, Tony didn't know why he thought of the ancient oriental art of monkey show. At this moment, Tony didn't want to continue playing anymore. He started to show off his acting skills and wanted to use palm cannons to fight with Rhodes. Seeing Tony use the armor to do a backflip and raise his arms to pose, Sherlock rolled his eyes again in annoyance. He shouldn't have any thoughts about these two funny guys. The behavior of the two can be said to be wearing the iron armor, which is the top of the technology level, and fighting a fight that only kindergarteners can talk about. Sherlock, who lost interest, threw away the glass in his hand, grabbed a box of pizza that was still well packaged on the table, stood up and walked towards the garage downstairs. Sherlock even did not forget to say hello to the two kindergarten students in steel armor before leaving. "Come back to me after you decide the winner." After saying that, he walked towards the garage by himself, holding a box of pizza and eating it while walking. When he came to the door of the garage, Jarvis's voice rang in Sherlock's ears. Mr. Sherlock, the lithium dioxide injection you want has been prepared and placed on the table in the garage. According to my calculations, a 65% concentration of lithium dioxide injection is enough to neutralize the toxins in Tony's body. Sherlock opened the door of the garage and put the pizza box aside. Then he walked to the table and picked up the injection prepared by Jarvis. After nodding with satisfaction, Sherlock put the injection into his library and waited for Tony to finish the fight before injecting him. After finding a chair to sit down, Sherlock seemed to be in a playful mood and asked while looking at the empty garage, "Jarvis, does the authority Tony gave me allow you to execute my orders?" After hearing Sherlock's question, Jarvis seemed to hesitate for a moment before answering Sherlock's question. "Yes, sir, your authority is the same as Pepper's. Both are second-level authority, second only to Mr. Tony Stark. But Mr. Sherlock, I have the right to refuse to execute some orders that will cause redundancy in my system." It seems that, when they first met, Jarvis was deeply impressed by Sherlock's mentally retarded questions. After answering Sherlock's questions, he even added a supplementary clause. But Sherlock didn't know why he heard a strong sense of irony in Jarvis's supplementary clause. Rolling his eyes at the empty garage, Sherlock muttered in a low voice, "Am I so unreliable?" Facing Sherlock's complaints, Jarvis even felt that his CPU temperature was rising. "Do you think you are talking human words? I may not be a human, but you are a real dog. Do you want me to help you recall what you did to me?" Fortunately, Jarvis, the artificial intelligence of the Provincial Party Committee, was still in an absolute advantage in reason. Although the CPU temperature rose several degrees due to his complaints, his powerful computing power and reason told Jarvis that it was better not to pay attention to Sherlock, the joker of the Provincial Party Committee. Seeing that his complaints did not seem to be supported by anyone, Sherlock felt meaningless and lost the idea of continuing to have fun. He ordered Jarvis directly, "Jarvis, I need you to back up yourself every week. No matter what the situation, you must not forget this. If possible, wait until Tony is free to ask Tony and record this in your source code after obtaining the highest authority." Hearing that Sherlock finally did not say anything shocking, Jarvis was relieved and began to execute Sherlock's orders. "Okay, Mr. Sherlock, I have recorded your request. I will ask about this later, when Tony has time." As soon as Jarvis' voice fell, Sherlock had not had time to nod with satisfaction, and the whole villa shook violently. After a while, the vibration of the villa finally stopped. Sherlock stood up from the chair and walked upstairs quickly. When he came to the living room, Sherlock saw Tony sitting on the ground wearing armor and throwing his head armor aside. "What's wrong? Did you lose the match? I told you not to stand on the left, but you didn't listen." Facing Sherlock's ridicule, Tony rolled his eyes in annoyance. The toxins in his body made him feel very uncomfortable now, and he didn't have much energy to pay attention to Sherlock's ridicule. Seeing that Tony didn't seem to have any thoughts, Sherlock no longer hesitated. With a flip of his right hand, the lithium dioxide synthesized by Jarvis just now appeared in Sherlock's hand and stabbed directly into Tony's neck. Chapter 72 Black Salted Egg and Black Widow. OFXXK, Sherlock, you little bastard, what did you inject me with? As soon as Charlotte's injection was completed, Tony's full-blooded shout came to his ears, and he covered his neck and cursed loudly. Facing Tony's question, Sherlock threw the syringe in his hand away, and then looked at Tony, who was sitting on the ground with his hands covered. "Lithium dioxide. It can effectively neutralize the toxins in your body. You are still a genius. If the magic potion, a convenient thing, doesn't work, can't you think of a scientific way? Use your brain, my dear Uncle Tony." Hearing Sherlock's words, Tony's eyes brightened a little, and he immediately said to Jarvis, "Jarvis, check the toxin content in my body." The next second Jarvis' voice came from the villa. "Mr. 17%, congratulations, the toxins in your body have been reduced to a safe level." After hearing Jarvis' words, Tony's eyes lit up, and he immediately couldn't wait to say, "Jarvis, make lithium dioxide injection immediately. I think I can't live without it anymore." As soon as Tony finished speaking, Sherlock looked at Tony as if he was a fool. He rubbed his forehead with his hands and looked at Tony, who had gotten up from the ground. I'm beginning to doubt the authenticity of PhD. You should know that this thing is not a good thing, right? Aren't you afraid of spiraling to the sky if you play too much? Facing Sherlock's contempt, Tony didn't have the slightest idea of refutation. He looked at Sherlock excitedly, just like a drowning man grabbing a life-saving straw. No, I know. But it doesn't matter. As long as lithium dioxide can help me survive for 3 months. After 3 months, I can continue to use your potion for detoxification. And your potion can also help me fight the toxicity of lithium dioxide itself. So I'm not worried at all. After listening to Tony's words, Sherlock had no room for rebuttal for a moment. This fucking bug was caught by him. Looking at Sherlock standing there with a changing expression, Tony happily walked up to him and patted him on the shoulder, then picked up Sherlock by the back of his collar. Sherlock, who was still immersed in the fact that he was trapped by Tony, was startled by his feet leaving the ground. Sherlock started to struggle in Tony's hands in an instant after reacting. "Put me down, you bastard. Where are you taking me? Put me down. Damn it, I'm going to use magic." But it was obvious that Tony had no intention of putting Sherlock down, and Sherlock was no match for Tony in the iron armor, unless Sherlock really used magic. But it was obvious that Sherlock had no intention of using magic in front of his blood relatives, but just struggled in Tony's hands like a maggot. Tony ignored Sherlock and quickly brought Sherlock to Sherlock's car at the gate of the villa, opened the driver's seat, and threw Sherlock into the car. Tony ran around and sat in the passenger seat, then looked at Sherlock, who had just struggled to sit. Ignoring Sherlock's murderous eyes, Tony looked at Sherlock and said to himself, "What are you looking at? Drive. Today is your dearest uncle's birthday. It's not too much to treat me to donuts." After listening to Tony's words, Sherlock took a deep breath for a long time and temporarily suppressed the urge to beat Tony up. After all, it was his birthday. Old birthday boy, bear it, bear it. A gentleman's revenge is never too late. Let him regret it tomorrow. After showing a perfect fake smile to Tony, who was sitting in the passenger seat wearing a battle armor, Sherlock started the car and drove to a nearby old donut shop. Maybe it was the wrong time. When the two came to the donut shop, there were not many people in the whole donut shop. Because of this, even though Tony walked into the donut shop wearing Iron Man's armor, it did not cause much impact. After Tony took a few photos and signed autographs, the two successfully got the hidden menu of the donut owner, which was said to be the oldest donut in the owner's home. Of course, Sherlock was skeptical about this. After all, in Sherlock's opinion, this thing was just a pancake with icing or chocolate. The two found a table and started to enjoy the donuts in their hands. Sherlock even took a bottle of milk from the library to match it. After all, soy milk was a bit too much. Just when the two were eating very happily, the door of the donut shop was pushed open again. Unlike Tony, Sherlock, who was sitting opposite Tony, saw who came in at first sight. "Black stewed egg. It's you. Nick the damned man with an I'm," asked the peerless strong man wearing a leather jacket and summer director of SHIELD kept in the dark, played around by Hydra Fury. The one following behind Fury, wearing a tights and red hair, is the legendary Black Widow, as expected. Sherlock's eyes fell on Black Widow for a long time before he tried to leave. Damn, this figure is really awesome. And Sherlock thinks that compared to Scarlett Johansson, although this Black Widow looks a lot like Scarlett, she is more beautiful than Scarlett. Of course, the figure is much stronger. Just the long, straight and thin legs are enough to beat Scarlett in seconds. Black Widow, who followed behind Black Egg, found Sherlock the moment she came in. As an agent next to Black Egg, Black Widow had naturally used the potion provided by Sherlock, especially the thing called Polyjuice Potion. In addition to the impressive taste, it can be said to be tailor-made for her. So when lurking beside Stark, Black Widow really paid special attention to Sherlock's information. But unfortunately, Sherlock was flying in Asgard at that time, so the two had no chance to meet. And this first meeting, Black Widow's attention was naturally on Sherlock, and she also keenly noticed that Sherlock tried to leave her sight. After feeling Sherlock's behavior, Black Widow's smile became brighter, as if she had found something interesting, and her eyes never left Sherlock. Fortunately, Sherlock didn't know the full of evil taste in Black Widow's head at this time. Otherwise, Sherlock would definitely let Black Widow taste what is called the punishment of fun. People, women will only affect the speed of my pulling out the magic wand. At this time, after watching Black Widow's energetic figure for a while, Sherlock was thinking about how to stay away from the unlucky black salted egg. As for developing with Black Widow, sorry, Sherlock is not interested at all, unless it is Anne Hathaway, Anya Taylor, Kristen Stewart, Margot Robbie, Ana de Armas, or Gal Gadot. Sherlock said he could consider it. Chapter 73. The dispute begins. Part 1. To be honest, Black Widow was used to Sherlock staring at her with a lewd look for a while. She even felt that, if no one stared at her with such eyes that day, she would feel uncomfortable. But Sherlock only looked at her for a while, and then lowered his head to focus on his donuts. In addition to Sherlock's age, Black Widow had a little misunderstanding, thinking that Sherlock was the kind of innocent boy. You know, this is the lighthouse country, and boys like innocent boys are as common as giant pandas here. This wave of misunderstandings immediately made Black Widow have the impulse of an older sister wanting to tease her younger brother, and even such an idea grew stronger in Black Widow's mind. Of course, Black Widow was not the only one who saw Sherlock's abnormality, but also Tony, Sherlock's uncle. Just when Tony turned around with a puzzled look and wanted to see who could make Sherlock show a lewd look but recover quickly, Tony was greeted by a needle. Fortunately, Tony's reaction speed was very fast. Although there was no helmet to assist him, Tony relied on his own reaction and the assistance of the iron armor to quickly grab the hand holding the syringe. What is this? What are you doing? Who are you? Seeing that Tony grabbed her arm, Black Widow also showed a rare expression of surprise. Neither Black Widow nor Black Egg had expected such an emergency. But looking at Tony's unusually cold and even murderous eyes, Black Egg decided to explain. Lithium dioxide can effectively neutralize the toxins formed by the palladium element in your body. Let her go, Tony. Agent Romanov has no ill intentions. After hearing what Black Egg said, Tony's eyes became less cold. After taking the injection from Black Widow's hand, he let go of Black Widow's arm, but he still stared at Black Widow. Agent Romanov, I need an explanation. Looking at Tony, who looked obviously not good, Black Widow was very calm. After rubbing her wrist, she introduced herself to Tony. Natasha Romanoff, codename Black Widow, SHIELD agent, was sent to protect you. Although Black Widow said it was protection, Tony didn't believe a word of it. Rather than protection, Tony would rather believe that it was surveillance or wanted to get something from him. Tony became more and more angry, and he rolled his eyes at the two people standing next to the table and waved his hand casually at Black Widow. I'm sorry to inform you, Agent Natasha Romanoff, you are fired. Facing Tony's dismissal declaration, Black Widow shrugged her shoulders without any burden, to show that it didn't matter. Until the end of the first round of confrontation between the three people, Sherlock sat quietly in his seat, holding a donut in his hands, and eating it very happily. But Sherlock's eyes kept turning back and forth between the three people, just like a chirping in a melon field, silently eating the big melon of the confrontation between the few people. At present, Tony and Black Egg are tied 1:1. Seeing Sherlock's appearance of a spectator, several people couldn't hold back, especially Hetty Luden himself, whose mouth twitched. After a while, he said to Sherlock, who was still sitting in his seat, Mr. Sherlock, if you don't mind, can you sit across from me? Your Uncle Tony and I have something to discuss. Although the content of the speech was a request, Hetty Luden's tone did not have the slightest meaning of a request, but more like an order. But Sherlock didn't care. After all, being able to eat spectators in the front row, as a fun person, there was no reason to refuse such a thing. So Sherlock honestly picked up his donut box, stood up and walked to the opposite side, squeezing Tony into the seat inside. Tony, who was wearing an iron armor, looked at his good nephew helplessly. He felt that his nephew was a little bit confused. He obviously had unparalleled abilities, but he still couldn't hold back in the face of such a situation, and acted cowardly. Tony said he couldn't understand. In fact, Sherlock was just afraid of trouble, especially Black Egg. It must be said that this guy is almost the most idiotic existence in the entire Marvel universe. You never know what he has in store. In addition, the shield lurking in Hydra is like a huge and slimy toad to Sherlock. Although it does not bite people and does not cause fatal injuries, it is indeed disgusting. Seeing Sherlock squeeze Tony into the seat inside, Black Egg sighed for no reason and squeezed into the innermost seat. Black Widow followed suit and sat next to Black Egg. The seats, which were originally very spacious, became visibly crowded after 4 people squeezed in. Both Black Egg and Tony felt the same way. The two started the second round of confrontation without any hesitation. After listening for a while, Sherlock lost interest and began to focus on the donuts in his hand. After all, Black Egg still used the same set in the movie. Topics like your father founded SHIELD. In short, the meaning of SHIELD is your home. Sherlock just curled his lips in disdain. If Harry Luden wanted to sign up for a class taught by a gold medal lecturer, he would not know that he was so unmotivated and his excuses were so annoying. Although it is normal for a son to inherit his father's business, Sherlock has never heard that SHIELD also has this tradition. Nimmer looked at Harry Luden's intention as if he wanted Tony to join the great cause of SHIELD. Tony was naturally not a fool. Facing Harry Luden's appeal that could not even catch up with 1/10 of the gold medal lecturer, he curled his lips in disdain and then started his own mouth cannon. In short, after the confrontation between the two gradually began to turn into a round based back and forth, Sherlock lost interest in this matter. Although Sherlock lost interest in Harry Luden and Tony, it does not mean that anyone has lost interest in Sherlock. The most typical example is Black Widow, who has already brought in the perspective of an older sister. Out of her own bad taste, Black Widow saw Sherlock's attention shift from eating melon to the donuts in his hand, and Black Widow could no longer suppress her inner desire to tease Sherlock, the innocent little boy. She quietly touched Sherlock's leg with her foot under the table. Sherlock was obviously stunned for a moment after feeling someone touching his leg, and when he looked up, he was greeted by Black Widow's eyes as springy as water. Chapter 74 The Dispute Begins. Part 2. Faced with such naked and undisguised teasing from Black Widow, Sherlock got goosebumps all over his body and shuddered fiercely. Mom was right, boys have to protect themselves outside. Although Sherlock likes older sisters, it does not mean that Sherlock likes a grandmother. Although Black Widow's figure and appearance are not bad, and even better than Scarlett Johansson, the actress who played Black Widow before Crossing, it is a pity that Black Widow is not the type Sherlock likes. Looking at Black Widow's spring-like eyes and the foot that has been rubbing on his calf, Sherlock put down the donut in his hand and took a deep breath very seriously. His expression became extremely serious as he looked at Black Widow, who was courting death. Women will only affect the speed of pulling out my wand. Look at the 12-way kick. As a player who has received military training from his uncles who are like animals, plus Sherlock's identity as a dragon country before Crossing, although he has never really seen what the 12-way kick looks like, he can at least imitate it. Feeling Sherlock's legs start to move under the table, Black Widow thought that the boy across from her couldn't stand her teasing anymore and was ready to move away from her, but the next second, Sherlock's two legs came over to her with moves. Although Sherlock didn't use any force, but feeling her legs locked, Black Widow, no matter how experienced she was, couldn't hold it back. The tender expression on her face froze for a moment and then turned into a strong surprise. With an expression that looked like "Are you sick?" Black Widow was greeted by Sherlock's sly expression, which seemed to say, "You can't do it either. You dare to provoke me, and you're still an agent of SHIELD." Black Widow was furious at the sly expression. Black Widow could understand that the boy didn't understand the situation, but Black Widow couldn't stand the fact that he used moves to lock my legs and then mocked me. At that moment, she broke free from Sherlock's moves and began to use her own moves to practice with Sherlock under the table. Tony and Black Egg on one side were constantly exchanging words on the table, while Black Widow and Black Sherlock on the other side were sitting on the table with smiles on the surface. But under the table, the two pairs of long legs of the two were almost dancing out of shadows, and they started to fight back and forth, and their movements were not surprisingly with moves. The four people who were fighting were extremely focused, and none of them noticed that the waiter standing in the bar not far away was looking at the guests at this table with an expression of looking at a fool. especially Black Widow and Sherlock, who were sitting outside and still competing in leg skills under the table. The waiter in the bar had even opened his phone and pressed 911. As long as the competition between the two dared to move from under the table to the table, the waiter swore that he would definitely press the call button without hesitation to call the police. After all, the leg skills of the two were with moves, and the waiter felt pain in his legs just by looking at them. As time passed, Sherlock gradually became a little inferior to Black Widow. After all, Black Widow was older, had more experience, and had more actual combat experience than Sherlock had eaten. Sherlock gradually fell into a disadvantage, and was finally caught by Black Widow, and locked his legs directly. No matter how Sherlock struggled, he could not break free from Black Widow's lock. On the table, Black Widow looked at the surprised Sherlock and smiled complacently, as if to say, "Young man, you are still tender." Sherlock looked at Black Widow's smug look, turned over unhappily, and stopped struggling. He just admitted defeat, grabbed the donuts on the table, and started eating again. Seeing that Sherlock didn't seem to want to continue, Black Widow gradually felt bored, so she let go of the legs that locked Sherlock's legs. Just when Sherlock wanted to show Black Widow what it means to be a liar, Black Egg and Tony turned the topic to Sherlock. "Mr. Sherlock." Facing the call of Black Braised Egg, Sherlock temporarily gave up the idea of showing Black Widow what everything is fair in war means. He turned around and looked at Black Braised Egg sitting next to Black Widow and slowly typed a question mark. Seeing Black Braised Egg staring at him with one eye, Sherlock also put away his playful thoughts and looked at Black Braised Egg, waiting for Black Braised Egg's question. Seeing Sherlock's expression of "is there anything wrong?" Nick Fury no longer hesitated and directly asked the question he wanted to know. "Mr. Sherlock, can you explain where you have been in the past month? There is no traffic record showing that you opened your gun store, and there is no trace of you in the entire gun store, even on social software, and there is no signal on the mobile phone for a whole month." Listening to Nick Fury's words, Sherlock felt his blood pressure rise all of a sudden, and immediately slammed the table hard, looking at Nick Fury across the table fiercely, and asked back, "Fuck, Black Brained Egg, are you spying on me?" It would have been better if Sherlock hadn't said it. As soon as the three words Black Brained Egg came out, Nick Fury's only remaining eye widened, and he looked at Sherlock with a hint of shock, confusion, and a hint of grievance. The originally serious topic was a little confused by Sherlock's word Black Brained Egg. Nick Fury even dared to swear that this was the first time in so many years as an agent that he didn't know how to take up the topic from the other party. Puff, puff. Two consecutive laughs made Nick Fury, who was sitting in his seat with surprise and grievance, even more aggrieved. The two laughs came from Tony and Black Widow next to Nick Fury. Although he and Sherlock often called Nick Fury Black Brained Egg in private, Tony never called him that in person. As for Black Widow's laughter, it was just that she couldn't hold it back. It profoundly demonstrated what it means to say I have undergone rigorous training, and generally I will never laugh unless I can't hold it back. Feeling the seriousness of her boss with a hint of question mark and a little bit of grievance in her doubt, Black Widow took a long time to wave her hand at Nick Fury. "Sorry, boss, I just remembered something interesting." Faced with Black Widow's explanation, Nick Fury rolled his eyes directly, "and it would be better for you not to explain." At the moment, he no longer entangled in this title, and stared at Sherlock with one eye, as if waiting for Sherlock's explanation. Faced with Nick Fury's inquiry, Sherlock was naturally not panicked at all, and gave an answer that he had prepared long ago. "Where else can I go? I'm going to make magical potions. By the way, my dear Uncle Tony, because Mr. Black Egg's surveillance of me makes me feel very uncomfortable, so the price of potions they buy from me will increase by 30% next time." Faced with his nephew's request, Tony was naturally happy to watch the fun, and he happily agreed. "No problem, my dear nephew." Seeing the uncle and nephew singing the same tune, even Nick Fury, who is known as the king of agents, couldn't help but break down. Fuck. Chapter 75. The Husky destroys the house. Nick Fury himself didn't know how he left this small donut shop. The only thing that impressed him and made him firmly implemented was a belief that he hated naughty children, especially the naughty child named Sherlock. Black Widow felt very happy, especially because her boss had a new nickname. Black Widow couldn't help but share it with her colleagues. After the two SHIELD agents left, Sherlock and Tony didn't want to continue eating here. They packed up the unfinished donuts and got on Sherlock's big pickup truck back to Tony's beach villa. As soon as he entered the villa, Tony rushed into the basement with the things that Black Sorcerer gave him. As for Sherlock, he took over Tony's living room without hesitation, turned on Tony's huge TV, and started watching his favorite American Finding Daddy show. Of course, Sherlock didn't forget the skincare products he bought for his future aunt in Asgard. Sherlock also called Pepper during the commercial break. Originally, he wanted to ask Pepper when she would get off work, but unfortunately, Tony had already handed over most of the company's business to Pepper. Now she is so busy that she can't even touch the ground. She is currently on a business trip and has no way to come back. However, Pepper thanked Sherlock on the phone for the gift he brought them, although she didn't know that the gift came from a distant alien planet. Hearing that Pepper was on a business trip, Sherlock could only pout helplessly. According to Pepper's instructions, he put the skincare products bought from Asgard in Pepper's room and left a note explaining the source and use of the cosmetics. Not long after Sherlock returned to the sofa while watching the program on TV and laughing, Tony ran upstairs and dragged Sherlock to ask Sherlock to use magic to help him go to his office to get a model of Stark Industrial Park back. In response to Tony's request, Sherlock opened a portal in a bad mood. The other side of the portal was Tony's office. Tony looked at this magic that he had never seen before and sighed that it was so convenient, and then began to move it. Not long after Tony moved the entire park model into the basement, Tony came to the living room wearing a noise-cancelling headset and carrying a large electric pickaxe and began to work on the floor of the living room. Although he knew that Tony was inspired by his father to discover a harmless new element, Sherlock felt that Tony was just a house demolition husky when he saw him doing it. After all, from Sherlock's perspective, Tony just went to the basement with the model for a while and then came back to start demolishing the house with an electric pickaxe. If Tony's beach villa was not an independent building with no neighbors around, he might have started to complain now. Even Sherlock was a little helpless about the sound of Tony's electric pickaxe and took out his wand and cast a silent spell on the electric pickaxe. The electric pickaxe, which was originally noisy, was still working, but it became silent. Tony, who was wearing noise-cancelling headphones, soon noticed something different. He took off his headphones and tried the silent electric pickaxe again. His eyes lit up and he turned to look at Sherlock. But what greeted Tony was Sherlock's expression, as if he was looking at her, as if to say, "Are you sure you want to demolish the house? And after demolishing the house, Pepper won't beat you to death." Looking at Sherlock's eyes, Tony could only helplessly explain to Sherlock that he had discovered a new element. Facing Tony's explanation, Sherlock's eyes looking at her became more intense. After Tony finished explaining, Sherlock asked a question he wanted to ask in the movie. Why don't you take a nap first and then wait until tomorrow morning to go directly to the company or the laboratory with a particle accelerator to do it directly? Do you have to go to destroy the house? Sherlock had this question when watching the movie, although he had to admit that watching Tony destroy the house for scientific research in the movie was indeed very exciting. When he saw it with his own eyes, he only felt helpless watching her destroy the house. Facing Sherlock's question, Tony just rolled his eyes, saying that Sherlock didn't understand the romance of scientific research at all, and Tony didn't want others to know that he had synthesized a new element with higher energy density. He wanted to be the first person in the world to synthesize the new element discovered by his father. After saying that, Tony, who seemed to have turned over a second year of middle school, pulled Sherlock to ask Sherlock to use magic to help him. Sherlock looked at the sky outside and then looked at the excited Tony, and without any hesitation, he cast a coma spell on Tony. Then the floating spell threw the sleepy Tony onto his bed. Sherlock endured learning how to destroy the house, but you don't even look at what time it is now. Who is a good person going to destroy the house for scientific research in the middle of the night? Wait until you wake up. After dealing with Tony, Sherlock yawned, found his guest room, took a shower and fell asleep. The next morning, just after dawn, Sherlock was pulled out of bed by Tony, and without any surprise, he was forced to work. Sherlock complained again and again, who would be forced to work without giving a bite of food. The landlord grandfather of the lighthouse country could not do this. But in the face of Sherlock's complaints, Tony turned a deaf ear and began to plan how to demolish the house. It must be said that in terms of demolishing and building the house, the magic in Harry Potter that Sherlock mastered is indeed extremely convenient. Drilling a hole is a crushing spell, and pulling a line or other things can be done with a transformation spell. Even the final cleaning work Sherlock can do with a cleanup, and even Tony has to admit that Sherlock is the most useful toolman he has met in these years. Of course, since Tony promised to buy him a proper badger racing car, Sherlock was content to be his tool without any complaints. With Sherlock's help, the two of them completed the assembly of the particle accelerator in just 1 week, which was originally a month's work. This speed was because Tony needed to place orders and deliver the goods, otherwise it might be faster. It was also because of this demolition that Tony found a lot of magical gadgets left by his father in his warehouse, including the unfinished Captain America shield. Just as Sherlock was holding the unfinished shield in his hand and looking at it carefully, the doorbell of Tony's villa rang first. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.